Hey everyone, thanks for being here with me tonight. Tonight we have 14 separate stories to go through. These cases come from all over the world, and they are all strange, dark, and very real. We are looking at events from Europe, South America, and beyond. Every single one of these things actually happened to real people. I am glad you could join me to hear them. It is going to be a long night of storytelling. Before we start, do me a favor. Please hit the like button and leave a comment below. If you click that button, it turns into a tiny golden retriever that guards your internet connection. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories. I would love to know where you are watching from tonight. Tell me your city and what time it is in the comments. Most importantly, make sure your doors and windows are locked. Check your security camera feed if you have one. You want to know you are safe. Outside your window, rain has started to fall. At first it is just a few light drops on the glass. Then it turns into a steady, soft curtain of sound. This rain is going to stay with us for every story tonight. The camera pulls away from your room and flies through the dark. It travels over the Atlantic and settles in the heart of Austria. We are standing inside the grand gold-leafed halls of the Vienna State Opera. The air is heavy with the smell of old wood and expensive perfume. A world-class soprano stands on the center of the stage. She is in the middle of a high-stress rehearsal. Suddenly, she stops singing and clutches her stomach with both hands. Her face turns a pale shade of gray as she stumbles backward. She collapses onto the hard wooden floor while the orchestra stops playing. People rush from the wings to help her, but she cannot speak. She is doubled over in extreme pain and gasping for air. This was just the beginning of a very strange medical emergency. Why would anyone target the staff of this cultural landmark? The Vienna State Opera is one of the most famous buildings on earth. It is a place of beauty and high art and tradition. But in October of 2007, something very dark was happening. The staff members were not just performers, but also technicians and cleaners. They all shared the same break rooms and the same hallways. None of them realized that a simple daily habit was now a trap. The tension in the building was reaching a breaking point. The opera season was at its absolute peak that year. Everyone was working long hours to keep the productions running smoothly. The stagehands were moving heavy sets, and the singers were practicing for hours. It was a bustling and high-stress environment for every single employee. To stay hydrated, they all used a communal water cooler. It sat in a quiet corner of the main break area. It was the one place where everyone gathered to catch their breath. No one expected it to be the source of a nightmare. This water cooler became the center of a sudden crisis. Within 1 hour of the soprano falling, more people got sick. A stagehand collapsed while moving a heavy curtain in the wings. Then a lighting technician fell ill while working high above the stage. By the middle of the afternoon, 10 people were in agony. They were all suffering from intense nausea and burning in their throats. The management realized this was not just a case of food poisoning. Something was very wrong with the water in the building. The scene in the break room was chaotic and terrifying. People were lying on the floor while paramedics rushed through the halls. The police arrived and immediately cordoned off the entire catering area. They found the water cooler and noticed something strange about it. When an officer opened the top, he smelled a sharp chemical odor. It did not smell like fresh spring water at all. It smelled like a mixture of lemons and heavy industrial soap. They realized the entire tank had been spiked with something toxic. Detectives began a frantic search for any signs of a leak. They checked the pipes and the plumbing throughout the historic building. But the forensic tests on the water told a different story. The liquid was full of a potent liquid laxative and cleaning chemicals. This was not an accident caused by old pipes or maintenance errors. Someone had opened that heavy plastic jug and poured poison inside. The police knew they were looking for someone with access to the back rooms. They needed to find the person who hated the opera. Investigators spent hours reviewing the security footage from the hallways. They watched hundreds of hours of grainy video from the previous night. Finally, they saw a figure lingering near the break room at midnight. The man was wearing a dark jacket and moving with a limp. He was not supposed to be in the building at that hour. He had been fired from his job as a stagehand weeks earlier. The guards recognized him immediately, as a man who left on bad terms. He looked directly at the camera and then vanished. The police tracked the man to a small apartment in Vienna. When they burst through his door, they found the evidence. There were empty bottles of industrial-strength laxatives on his kitchen table. They also found several containers of heavy-duty floor cleaner in his trash. The man did not even try to deny what he had done. He told the officers that he wanted to ruin the entire show. He felt he had been unfairly dismissed, and he wanted revenge. His plan was to make sure no one could perform. Now I want you to really think about this. What if this man had chosen a much more lethal substance? He had total access to the water that every performer drank. He could have used something that did not just cause stomach pain. It is a terrifying thought that one petty grudge could end lives. I do not know about you, but that reality sends chills down my spine. We trust our workplaces and our communal spaces to be safe, but one disgruntled person can turn a simple drink into a weapon. The man was taken into custody and charged with multiple crimes. He faced counts of aggravated assault and causing a domestic disturbance. Because no one died, he was given a relatively short prison sentence. However, his career in the world of theater was completely over. He had tried to silence the music with a bottle of chemicals. The legal outcome was a warning to anyone seeking petty revenge. He would spend the next few years behind bars thinking about his choices. The case shocked the entire city of Vienna. The opera house had to make massive changes to their security. They installed locks on all the water coolers and food storage. New protocols were put in place for every single employee in the building. The grand halls were scrubbed clean, but the memory of the event remained. Performers now looked twice at their water before taking a sip. The poisoning of high culture was a bizarre and petty act. It exposed a vulnerability in a place that seemed untouchable. The music eventually returned, but the trust was gone. We leave the gold halls and fine music of Vienna behind us. We travel east into the dark woods of the Slovakian countryside. The high culture of the opera feels like a distant memory now. Here, the shadows are deeper and the air feels much older. In the village of Smolenice, the people live in the modern world. But something ancient and primal was about to crawl into their bedrooms. It was something that belonged in a very dark and forgotten storybook. The rain continues to wash over the quiet stone houses tonight. It is time to look at a different kind of hunger. Inside a quiet bedroom, a woman lay fast asleep in the dark. The only sound was the wind moving through the open window. Suddenly, she felt a sharp and stinging pain on her neck. It felt like a needle or a small jagged tooth. She reached up to touch her skin and felt something wet. Her heart began to race as she realized she was not alone. A dark figure was leaning over her bed in the deep shadows. It was a man she did not know, watching her silently. He did not move or speak as she began to scream. The intruder turned and vanished into the night without a sound. The woman turned on the light, but the room was empty. She looked in the mirror and saw 2 small red marks. They were bleeding slightly, and her skin was starting to swell up. There were no signs of a struggle, and nothing was missing. She had not been robbed of her jewelry or her money. The intruder had only come for one specific and terrifying thing. He had come to taste her blood while she was sleeping. This was not a nightmare, but a very real and physical assault. The people of Smolenice were now facing a monster among them. The local news would soon call him the vampire. Was there a literal monster stalking the quiet streets of the village? People in town began to lock their doors and close their windows. They shared stories of a tall man who moved like a shadow. He did not look for gold or silver or expensive electronics. He only looked for women who were sleeping soundly in their beds. The motive for these crimes was completely unknown to the local police. They had never seen anything like this in their small community before. The fear in the air was thick enough to feel with your hands. Everyone wondered who would be the next victim of the night. Let us go back to August of 2007. It was a very hot summer in the region of Slovakia. The nights were muggy, and the air was completely still and heavy. Most families in Smolenice did not have expensive air conditioning units. They kept their windows open to let in the cool night air. It was a town where everyone knew their neighbors by name. Children played in the streets until the sun went down every day. No one felt the need to lock their gates or doors. It was a place of total peace and quiet safety. The village sat at the base of the beautiful little Carpathian Mountains. It was a scenic place where people lived a very simple life. Most of the residents worked in local shops or small farms. They spent their evenings sitting on their porches and talking to friends. The crime rate in the area was almost non-existent back then. People felt secure in the privacy of their own cozy homes. They believed that the only danger in the woods was the wildlife. No one expected a human predator to be watching from the trees. The summer was supposed to be a time of relaxation. Reports began to surface of a shadowy figure leaning over beds. It started with one woman and then another a few days later. They all told the same terrifying story to the local officers. They would wake up and see a man standing over them. He did not speak or move until they started to wake up. Then he would lean down and bite their necks very quickly. Before they could even scream, he would jump out of the window. He was fast, and he seemed to know the layout of every house. The police realized they were dealing with a very focused person. The frequency of the attacks began to increase as the weeks passed. The town was gripped by a deep and very regional panic. Women refused to sleep alone, and many bought dogs for protection. The local media picked up the story and ran huge headlines. They called the intruder the Vampire of Smolensk in every paper. This name only added to the psychological terror of the community. People started to believe the stories of ancient folklore were coming true. They looked at their neighbors with new eyes of dark suspicion. The peace of the summer was completely shattered by the attacks. The police department was small, and they were quickly becoming overwhelmed. They set up patrols and asked the men to watch the streets. Groups of neighbors walked through the village with flashlights and heavy sticks. They searched the alleys and the gardens for any sign of a man, but the intruder was always one step ahead of the search parties. He seemed to disappear into thin air as soon as he was seen. He did not leave footprints or fingerprints on the windows he used. It was like he was a ghost moving through the stone walls. The investigation was failing to find a single lead. The puncture wounds on the victims were very small and precise. Doctors examined the marks and found they were made by human teeth. The bites were not meant to kill or cause major injury. They were shallow and only designed to draw a small amount of blood. This made the case even more disturbing for the forensic teams. It suggested that the attacker had a very specific and dark obsession. He was not looking for a fight or a quick robbery. He was looking for a very personal and intimate type of assault. The psychological impact on the victims was far worse than the pain. One victim described the sensation of his breath on her cold skin. She said he smelled like dirt and old paper and sweat. He did not use a knife or a gun to threaten her. He only used his teeth and his bare hands to hold her. The room was always silent during the entire duration of the attack. He did not make a sound even when he was leaping away. This level of calm and steady focus was chilling to everyone. The police knew this was not a crime of sudden passion. It was a planned ritual that he repeated over and over again. The intruder was becoming more bold with every single night. The detectives looked into local records for any history of mental illness. They checked the files of men who had been released from hospitals. They also looked for anyone who was obsessed with vampire folklore. This was the era when vampire books and movies were very popular. Many young people were drawn to the dark aesthetic of the genre, but the attacks in Smolensk were far more grounded and terrifying. This was not a fictional story for the women who were bitten. It was a real-life trauma that was leaving them scared of sleep. The town felt like it was under a dark spell. The police were desperate for a break in the case that month. They even brought in experts from the city to help them search. They set up hidden cameras in some of the most vulnerable homes, but the attacker seemed to know where the cameras were being placed. He avoided those houses and moved to a different part of town. He was using the thick woods to navigate around the village unnoticed. He could move from one end of Smolensk to the other in minutes. The officers were always just a few steps behind the shadowy figure. The frustration was starting to boil over for the local leaders. The break in the case finally came on a humid Tuesday night. A woman was sleeping in her room with a heavy lamp nearby. She had been feeling nervous for days and kept the light on. Suddenly, she felt the familiar and cold sensation of a hand. She did not scream, but instead she reached for the ceramic lamp. She swung it with all of her might at the dark shadow. The heavy base hit the man square in the side of his head. He let out a loud groan and stumbled back against the wall. This was the first time anyone had actually hurt the intruder. The woman jumped out of bed and ran toward the hallway door. She could hear the man gasping for air on the bedroom floor. He was bleeding from a large cut on his forehead from the hit. He scrambled toward the window and managed to pull himself through it, but he left behind a large amount of blood on the floor. He also left a piece of his clothing snagged on the frame. The woman called the police, and they arrived in under 5 minutes. They secured the room and collected every single drop of his blood. This was the decisive clue they had been waiting for. The forensic team sent the DNA samples to the lab immediately. They ran the profile through the national database of known criminals. Within 48 hours, they had a match for a local man. He was a deeply disturbed individual who lived alone near the woods. He had a history of minor trespassing and very strange social behavior. When the police surrounded his small house, he did not resist them. He was sitting in his living room with a bandage on his head. He looked tired and almost relieved that the hunt was finally over. The reign of the vampire was finally coming to an end. The man explained his process to the officers during the interview. He would watch a house for hours from the cover of the trees. He waited until every light went out and the breathing slowed. Then he would remove his shoes and climb through an open window. He moved with the grace of a cat across the wooden floors. He had spent years studying the folklore of the region in books. He believed that drinking blood would give him some kind of power. He wanted to feel the life force of his victims in his mouth. It was a dark and deeply personal ritual for him. He described the moment of the bite with a detached tone. He said he did not want to cause any lasting physical harm. He only wanted a small taste to satisfy his growing hunger. To him, the women were not people, but sources of energy. He felt like he was part of a secret world of shadows. He would stay in the room for minutes, just watching them sleep. He enjoyed the feeling of being invisible and powerful in the dark. The detectives were horrified by how calm he was during his confession. He seemed to think his actions were perfectly normal and justified. The man had maps of the village with marks on certain houses. He had planned out dozens of more attacks for the coming weeks. He was obsessed with the idea of becoming a legend in town. The vampire was a character he had created for his own mind. He spent his days in a dark room reading about ancient myths. Then he would spend his nights trying to bring those myths to life. He was a man who had completely lost his grip on reality. The police found jars of preserved items in his kitchen during the search. They realized he had been doing this for a long time. The man had used his knowledge of the woods to avoid capture. He knew every trail and every hiding spot in the Little Carpathians. He would often watch the police patrols from the high ridges. He thought it was a game and he was winning every night, but he had underestimated the bravery of his final victim that night. He did not expect a woman to fight back with a lamp. That one moment of courage was enough to bring down his empire. The monster was revealed to be just a lonely and broken man. The illusion he had built was shattered in a single blow. The search of his home revealed even more disturbing evidence of his life. There were sketches of women sleeping that he had drawn himself. He had been watching them for much longer than the police thought. Some of the dates on the drawings went back several years in time. It was a massive and long-term campaign of stalking and terror. He had collected hair and small items from some of the houses too. The sheer scale of his obsession was difficult for the town to grasp. He was a predator who had been living right in their own backyard. The true horror was how close he had been. Doctors spent weeks evaluating the man in a secure medical wing. They found that he suffered from a rare form of clinical vampirism. This is a condition where a person has a delusion about needing blood. It is often linked to deep-seated trauma or severe mental illness. The man had no friends or family to keep him grounded in reality. He had retreated into a world of fiction and ancient dark spirits. He truly believed he was transforming into something more than human. The case became a landmark study for psychologists in the country of Slovakia. It was a rare glimpse into a very dark mind. The village of Smolenice did not go back to normal right away. Many of the victims struggled with insomnia and severe anxiety for years. They could no longer sleep with their windows open in the summer. The sound of the wind or a branch would trigger a panic. The vampire had taken their sense of safety and their peace of mind. The town council held meetings to help people process the collective trauma. They wanted to make sure that no one felt alone in their fear. The stone houses felt a little more like prisons than homes for a while. The scars of the summer were deep and very real. Now let us pause for a moment and really think about this. I want you to imagine you are in your own bed tonight. You feel completely safe and you are drifting off to sleep. Then you feel the cold skin of a stranger on your neck. I do not know about you, but that really sends chills. We think our homes are the one place where we are in control. But for these women, that control was taken away by a shadow. It is a terrifying thought that a person could be watching you. We share this world with people whose minds we cannot understand. You and I can look at this and see a very disturbed man. We see the logic of DNA and police reports in courtrooms. But to the victims, he was a nightmare come to life in the dark. They did not see a broken man, but a monster with teeth. It is a reminder that the things we fear in stories are real. Sometimes the monster is just a neighbor living a few doors down. It makes you want to double check the locks on your windows. I know I will be checking mine before I go to sleep tonight. The human mind is capable of some very strange and dark things. The man was eventually deemed a danger to society by the court. He was not sent to a standard prison for his many crimes. Instead, he was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility for life. The judge ruled that he needed constant medical and mental supervision. He would never be allowed to walk the streets of a village again. The legal outcome provided some small amount of closure for the town. They knew that the vampire was finally locked away in a bright room. He could no longer hide in the shadows or the woods of the mountains. His reign of terror was officially over. Today, the village of Smolenice is a quiet and beautiful place again. The castle on the hill still watches over the small stone houses. People still talk about the summer of 2007 in whispers. It has become a dark footnote in the folklore of the entire region. The vampire is a story that parents tell to make sure kids come home. But for those who lived through it, the memory is not a story. It is a reminder that real evil does not always wear a mask. Sometimes it just waits for an open window in the middle of the night. A single shard of ceramic was the end of a nightmare. The mountains of Slovakia are far behind us now. We travel across Europe to a small town in England. Trowbridge is a place of gray bricks and wet pavement. The rain here is constant and very cold tonight. In Slovakia, a man wanted blood, but here a man wanted money. It is a much more common and much more lethal desire. We are walking down a quiet residential street. The houses all look the same under the yellow street lights. Behind one of these doors, a woman is celebrating a win. She has no idea that her luck is about to run out. A neighbor noticed that Jenny Gray had not been outside all day. It was very unusual for the active 70-year-old woman. Her curtains were still drawn, and her milk was on the step. The neighbor knocked on the wooden door, but there was no answer. They tried the handle and found that the door was unlocked. They stepped into the small hallway and called out her name. The house was silent and smelled faintly of copper and dust. They walked into the living room and found a scene of horror. Jenny Gray was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. The room was a mess of shattered glass and broken furniture. It was clear that a violent struggle had taken place there. Jenny had been beaten with a heavy and blunt object. There was no pulse, and her skin was already cold to the touch. The neighbor ran back into the street, screaming for help. Within minutes, the quiet neighborhood was filled with flashing blue lights. The police cordoned off the entire block with yellow tape. Investigators in white suits began to crawl through the small apartment. They were looking for any clue to explain this brutal attack. How could a piece of paper meant for joy become a death warrant? This was a woman who did not have any enemies. She was a kind grandmother who lived a very simple life. She did not own expensive jewelry or keep large amounts of cash. There was no obvious reason for someone to kill her so cruelly. The detectives were baffled by the sheer level of violence used. They wondered if the killer had been looking for something specific. A single scratch-off lottery ticket was the key to everything. It was a small prize that led to a massive tragedy. Let us go back to April of 2007. It was a typical spring afternoon in the town of Trowbridge. The clouds were heavy and a light mist was falling. Jenny Gray was well known by everyone on her street. She was the kind of person who always had a smile. At 70 years old, she still walked to the shops every day. She enjoyed the fresh air and the chance to chat. Her neighbors considered her the heart of the community. She was a woman who found joy in the smallest things. No one could imagine her having a single secret enemy. Jenny had lived in the same small house for decades. She was proud of her independence and her cozy home. Her daily routine was as steady as a ticking clock. Every afternoon, she would put on her coat and grab her purse. She walked 2 blocks to the local corner grocery store. The staff there knew exactly what she wanted every time. She always bought a pint of milk and a loaf of bread. Sometimes she would treat herself to a small bar of chocolate. This was her favorite part of the entire day. She felt safe and happy in her quiet neighborhood. On this particular Tuesday, Jenny decided to try her luck. She reached into her purse and pulled out a few coins. She asked the clerk for a yellow lottery scratch-off ticket. It was a common habit for people in the area. Most people hoped to win a few pounds for a treat. Jenny stood by the counter and used a coin to scratch. Her eyes widened as the winning numbers were slowly revealed. She let out a small gasp of pure and genuine surprise. She had won a prize and she could not hide it. A bright smile spread across her wrinkled face. She did not realize that a man was standing right behind her. He was a neighbor who lived just a few doors down. He watched her face light up with that look of victory. In his mind, he did not see a small win. He saw a jackpot that could solve all of his problems. He had been struggling with debt and a very dark mood. The sight of her winning ticket triggered something in his head. He watched her tuck the yellow paper into her small purse. He followed her out of the shop at a distance. Greed was already starting to grow in his heart. Jenny walked home with a bit more energy in her step. She was thinking about how she would spend the extra money. It was not a fortune, but it was a nice surprise. She entered her house and locked the door behind her. She placed the ticket on the kitchen table next to her tea. She felt like the luckiest woman in the world that afternoon. She had no idea that her neighbor was standing outside. He was staring at her window with a very dark focus. He was convinced that she was now hiding a massive fortune. The perceived scent of wealth was making him dangerous. Later that night, the neighbor decided to make his move. He knew that Jenny lived alone and was physically quite frail. He waited until the street was dark and the houses were quiet. He carried a heavy metal tool hidden under his dark jacket. He approached her back door and found it was not locked. He stepped into the kitchen and saw the yellow ticket. He did not stop to check the value of the prize. He only thought about the money he believed she possessed. When Jenny walked into the room, he did not hesitate. He attacked her with a level of ferocity that was shocking. The struggle was short because Jenny could not fight back well. The neighbor struck her repeatedly until she stopped moving at all. He then began to frantically search the entire small house. He threw clothes out of drawers and emptied every single cabinet. He was looking for a stash of cash or expensive jewels. He was certain that a lottery winner would have more money. He found almost nothing of value in the modest apartment. Finally, he grabbed the yellow lottery ticket from the kitchen table. He stuffed it into his pocket and fled into the night. He felt like he had finally won. The police arrived the next day after the neighbor's discovery. They found the house in a state of absolute chaos. It looked like a professional burglar had torn the place apart, but the detectives noticed something very strange about the scene. The most valuable electronics were still sitting on the shelves. A small jar of emergency cash in the pantry was untouched. It seemed the killer was only looking for one specific item. They interviewed the shop clerk and learned about the lottery ticket. This was the first real lead in the entire investigation. They knew the motive was tied to that win. The investigators began to talk to everyone on the street. They asked if anyone had seen Jenny at the grocery store. One witness remembered seeing a man following her that afternoon. They described a neighbor who lived just 3 houses away from Jenny. The police went to his door to ask a few questions. The man seemed very nervous, and his hands were shaking badly. He claimed that he had been home alone all night long, but the officers noticed a fresh scratch on his pale cheek. They decided they needed to search his property more thoroughly. They obtained a warrant and returned the next morning. The search of the neighbor's house was very fast and effective. They did not find any gold or large stacks of cash. However, they decided to look through the trash in the alley. Inside a greasy bag, they found a crumpled yellow paper. It was the lottery scratch-off ticket that belonged to Jenny. When the forensic team looked closer, they saw a dark stain. There was a smear of dried blood on the corner of it. This was the decisive piece of evidence they needed for an arrest. The neighbor was taken into custody while the neighborhood watched in silence. He was still wearing the same dark jacket. The detectives finally took the ticket to the lottery office. They wanted to know exactly how much Jenny had actually won. The clerk scanned the barcode and the computer screen lit up. The total prize for the ticket was exactly 10 pounds. The neighbor had murdered an elderly woman for the price of a lunch. He had believed she was a millionaire based on a smile. In reality, she had won just enough for a small treat. The sheer pointlessness of the crime left the officers in shock. A human life had been traded for almost nothing at all. The tragedy was deeper than anyone had thought. Now, I want you to really think about this situation. This woman died for the price of a simple meal. The killer thought he was changing his entire life forever. He was so blinded by greed that he did not check the facts. Instead, he threw his own life away for 10 pounds. I do not know about you, but that reality is sickening. A human life should be worth more than any amount of money, but here it was traded for a tiny piece of paper. It is a deep irony that is hard to wrap your head around. Luck can be a very dangerous thing to have. The neighbor was brought to trial later that same year. The evidence of the bloody ticket was impossible to explain away. He was convicted of murder and given a life sentence in prison. The judge called the crime one of the most senseless acts. He will spend the rest of his days behind bars for 10 pounds. The case became a tabloid sensation across the entire United Kingdom. People talked about the lottery curse and the danger of perceived wealth. It highlighted how desperation can turn a neighbor into a cold killer. The town of Trowbridge would never feel the same again. The family of Jenny Gray was left with a hole in their hearts. They could not understand why such a kind person was taken. Her small house sat empty for a long time after the trial. The neighbors often left flowers on the doorstep in her memory. They remembered her as the woman who always had a bright smile. The yellow ticket was a symbol of a life cut short by greed. It was a reminder that even a small win can draw a predator. The mist continues to fall on the gray bricks of Trowbridge tonight. One person's joy became another person's ultimate and final darkness. A single crumpled piece of yellow paper sat in an evidence locker. It was a physical reminder of a life traded for a pittance. The rain outside the window sounds like the scratching of a coin. It is a steady and rhythmic noise that fills the quiet room now. We move away from the gray streets of the English town. The camera travels back across the water toward the continent. We are looking for a different kind of enclosed space now. It is a place where people go to sleep and never wake up. The smell of a faint and sweet mist is in the air. The lock on the door was supposed to be enough to keep danger away. In the last story, a woman felt safe in her own small house. She trusted the wood and metal to keep the dark world outside. Now we look at a different room made of thick and heavy steel. It is traveling at 60 miles per hour through the Hungarian night. The door is bolted from the inside with a very modern security latch. A wealthy businessman sleeps soundly on a soft and expensive silk pillow while believing he is safe. He woke up as the sun was just starting to rise over the hills. The train tracks hummed with a steady and rhythmic pulse under the massive engine. He reached for his heavy gold wedding ring on the small bedside table, but the surface of the polished wood was completely bare and totally empty. He blinked his eyes and looked around the small and private cabin. His leather wallet was sitting exactly where he had left it last night. However, when he opened it, every single banknote had been systematically removed. The man felt a sudden wave of confusion wash over his entire body. He checked the heavy steel door and found it was still bolted shut. No one could have entered the room without breaking the heavy iron latch. He looked at the small safe built into the wall of the cabin. The door was hanging wide open, and the contents were gone. His expensive watch and his passport had vanished into the thin night air. He felt a strange and heavy pressure in his head as he stood. How do you rob an entire train car without a single person waking up? This was the question that would haunt the police for many long months. These victims were traveling in the most expensive and secure berths available. They were surrounded by staff and security guards in a moving steel fortress. Yet someone had moved through the cars like a ghost in the dark. They had taken thousands of pounds in jewelry and cash without a sound. The method of the theft was something from a high-stakes movie. Let us go back to September of 2007 in Budapest. The city was glowing under the warm lights of the central station. The international train to Vienna was waiting on the tracks for the passengers. It was a route famous for its luxury and its long history. People from all over the world paid a premium for this experience. They wanted to sleep in comfort while traveling across the European borders. The staff wore crisp uniforms and served fine champagne in the lounge car. The businessman boarded the train with a sense of excitement and peace. He carried a small bag filled with his most valuable personal items. He was greeted by a polite steward who showed him to his room. The cabin was a masterpiece of engineering and comfort for the long trip. It had a private bathroom and a high-quality ventilation system. He felt completely isolated from the noise and the chaos of the world. He locked his door and settled in for a night of rest. The train pulled out of the station and began its long journey. It moved smoothly through the Hungarian countryside as the sun went down. The businessman enjoyed a meal and then returned to his private space. He turned the heavy deadbolt and felt a deep sense of security. He placed his ring on the table and tucked his wallet away safely. He fell into a deep and dreamless sleep within a few minutes. He did not hear the soft clicking sound coming from the ceiling vents. A subtle and colorless gas began to flow into the small cabin air. It was completely odorless and impossible for a sleeping person to detect. The thieves were using a powerful sedative designed for medical use only. It was being pumped directly into the ventilation system of the first class. Every passenger in the car was soon under a heavy chemical fog. Their breathing slowed down, and their bodies became limp on the soft beds. They were now completely at the mercy of the silent intruders. The thieves moved through the train car with gas masks on their faces. They used a master key to bypass the locks on the outside. Because the passengers were unconscious, the thieves did not have to be quiet. They moved quickly, and with the efficiency of a professional military unit, they emptied the safes and stripped the jewelry from the sleeping victims. They even took the passports to make the recovery process more difficult. It was a systematic and cold-blooded stripping of the wealthy travelers. The gang spent less than 5 minutes in each of the private cabins. They knew exactly where the valuables were hidden in the small spaces. They did not take any large items that would slow them down later. They only wanted the most liquid assets like cash and gold coins. They moved from car to car without being noticed by the guards. The ventilation system continued to pump the gas to keep everyone down. It was a perfect and terrifying plan, executed with total precision. The thieves jumped from the train at a remote and dark location. They had a vehicle waiting for them on a quiet dirt road nearby. The train continued its journey toward Vienna at a high rate of speed. Inside the cars, dozens of people were still lost in a deep fog. They would not wake up for several more hours of heavy sleep. By the time the sun came up, the thieves were far away. They had crossed the border and vanished into the local population. The morning discovery was a scene of total chaos and loud shouting. Passenger after passenger realized they had been robbed during the night. They stumbled into the hallways, clutching their heads in pain and confusion. Many of them felt sick and dizzy from the effects of the gas. The train staff called for the police to meet them in Vienna. When the doors opened, the platform was filled with officers and doctors. The investigation into the nightmare on the Orient Express route began. Police forensic teams began to crawl through every inch of the car. They were looking for any sign of a struggle or a forced entry. They found that every lock was still in perfect working order. There were no fingerprints on the surfaces of the metal or wood. It was like the thefts had been committed by a group of ghosts. But the doctors noticed a strange chemical smell on the victim's clothes. They decided to take samples of the air inside the cabin vents. The analysis of the air filters revealed the secret of the heist. The detectives found traces of a highly concentrated and powerful anesthetic. This gas was not something that a common criminal could easily buy. It required specialized knowledge to handle and deliver through a vent system. The police realized they were looking for a very sophisticated criminal gang. This was not a simple crime of opportunity by a local thief. It was an international operation that had been planned for months. This turning point changed the entire direction of the criminal case. The authorities realized that the gang had moved across many borders. They had exploited the lack of a unified railway police force in Europe. They could commit a crime in one country and vanish into another. This made the task of tracking them down almost impossible for local cops. The thieves knew the schedules and the security routines of the staff. They had spent a long time studying the layout of the train. Now, I want you to really think about this for a moment. You are in a locked room on a moving train in the night. You trust the technology and the staff to keep you totally safe. But the very air you breathe is turned into a weapon. I do not know about you, but that is a terrifying thought. We believe we are in control of our own private environments. But these thieves showed that no lock can stop a gas. It makes the idea of travel feel very vulnerable and dangerous. The thieves moved like a professional team through the sleeping cars that night. They had calculated the exact dose of gas to keep people down. They did not want to kill anyone because that would bring heat. They only wanted to take what they could carry and get away fast. This level of cold and calculated planning is a special kind of evil. They were willing to poison dozens of people for a few rings. It shows a complete lack of regard for any human safety. We trust the systems around us to function as they are designed. We believe that a first-class ticket buys us a layer of safety. But here the luxury of the train was used against the victims. The ventilation system that provided comfort became the delivery for the poison. It is a deep irony that is hard to ignore in this case. Our modern world has many hidden doors that criminals can use. I think about this every time I enter a hotel room now. You never truly know what is coming through the vents. The legal outcome of this case was a massive and long struggle. The gang remained at large for many months after the September heist. They continued to target international train routes across the entire continent. However, the case led to a major change in European rail security. The different nations created a unified task force to patrol the tracks. They installed gas detectors in the ventilation systems of all sleeper cars. The sleep gas heist changed the way we travel in the dark. The businessman never recovered his wedding ring or his lost cash. He still has occasional headaches from the effects of the gas that night. The memory of waking up in that empty cabin stays with him forever. He no longer travels by train when he has to cross borders. The luxury of the Orient Express route will always be stained. He knows that the most dangerous things are often the ones you cannot see. The rain continues to hit the window of the moving car. It is a steady sound that covers the noise of the world. The sleep on the train was deep and peaceful. It was a chemical wall that kept the world away. But in the city of Medellin, a different kind of sleep exists. It is a walking sleep where you are still awake. You can talk and walk and even smile at strangers. However, your mind is no longer your own property. You are a puppet on a string of invisible chemicals. The rain in Colombia is warm and falls on the palms. We are moving into the neon heart of a dangerous night. This is a place where you lose your soul while standing up. A young man from the United States wandered the busy streets of Medellin. He was wearing no shoes, and his clothes were torn and dirty. His eyes were wide and blank as he stared at the traffic. He did not know his own name or where he was staying. Local people watched him stumble along the sidewalk in the bright sun. He had been missing for over 48 hours in the city. When the police stopped him, he could not explain anything. He just stood there with a thin and empty smile on his face. The man was taken to a local hospital for a quick evaluation. Doctors found that he was not drunk or high on common drugs. However, he was in a state of total and complete amnesia. He had a small amount of white powder on his shirt collar. His bank accounts had been drained of every single peso he owned. His expensive watch and his laptop were also completely gone now. The most terrifying part was that he had a memory of helping. He vaguely recalled opening the door for a group of strangers and laughing. What kind of drug could turn a man into a willing slave? In Medellin, they call it burundanga, but the world knows it as scopolamine. It is a substance that comes from a common and beautiful tree. The drug is often called the devil's breath by the local people. It has the power to strip away a person's entire free will. You become a zombie who follows every command without any hesitation. You will hand over your keys and your codes with a grin. The terror of this drug was spreading across the whole country fast. Let us go back to the early months of 2007. Medellin was a city trying to move past its violent and dark history. It was becoming a popular destination for tourists from all over the world. People came for the beautiful weather and the very vibrant nightlife. The district of El Poblado was the center of all the action. It was filled with upscale bars and crowded neon dance clubs. Lares Park was the place where everyone gathered to drink and laugh. It felt like a modern and very safe tropical paradise for travelers. The nightlife was energetic, and the music was always playing very loudly. Men and women danced under the flashing lights of the grand clubs. Foreigners felt welcomed by the friendly and warm local residents there. They walked the streets with their phones and their wallets out. The fear of the old cartels was starting to fade away, but a new and more subtle kind of predator was watching. These criminals did not use guns or knives to get money. They used a tiny puff of powder to steal your mind and soul. A group of women known as the Black Widows worked the bars. They were young and beautiful and moved with a steady grace. They would look for men who were alone or looking wealthy. They would approach them with a smile and a friendly greeting. Their goal was to get close enough to deliver the poison. Sometimes they would slip it into a cold and colorful drink. Other times they would simply blow it into a man's face. It only took a single breath to change your life forever. The drug works on the brain with a terrifying and fast speed. It shuts down the part of the mind that makes decisions. You are still conscious and you can still talk to people, but you are no longer in charge of your own actions. You will answer any question with the absolute and total truth. If a stranger asks for your bank PIN, you give it. If they ask to go to your home, you lead them. You are a passenger in your own body for many hours. It is a nightmare that you cannot feel. One victim remembered sitting at a bar with two pretty women. They were laughing and sharing stories about their lives in the city. One of the women leaned in close to whisper a secret. She blew a tiny cloud of white dust toward his nose. He felt a light tingle, and his vision became very clear. The world seemed to slow down, and his fear vanished completely. He felt a deep and powerful urge to please his new friends. He would do anything they asked of him that night. He was no longer himself. The women told him that they wanted to see his apartment. He happily agreed and walked them past his own security guards. He used his key to open the heavy door for them. He even helped them pack his television and his computer. He held the bags while they emptied his bedroom closet completely. To the guards, he looked like a man helping his friends. He was smiling and chatting as they carried his life away. He had no idea that he was being robbed in broad daylight by the women. The thieves drove him to an automated teller machine across town. They asked him to withdraw the maximum amount of cash allowed. He punched in his secret code and handed over the money. He did this at 5 different locations during the dark night. He never once felt like he was in any kind of danger. He felt like he was on a wonderful and exciting adventure. The drug had erased his ability to feel any natural suspicion. He was a perfect and silent witness to his own total financial ruin. The next morning, he woke up on a park bench miles away. He had no idea how he had gotten to that location. His pockets were empty and his shoes were missing from his feet. He looked at his hands and saw they were dirty and scratched. The last thing he remembered was the smell of the bar. The rest of the night was a black hole in his mind. He felt a deep and hollow sense of shame and confusion. He was one of dozens of victims that same month in the city. The police in Medellin began to see a very disturbing pattern. Dozens of men were showing up at hospitals with the same story. They had all been out at bars in the El Poblado area. They had all met a group of friendly and beautiful women. Then they had lost several days of their lives to the void. The reports were coming in from locals and from international tourists. The scale of the robbery spree was reaching epidemic levels fast. The city was facing a crisis of safety and public trust. Medical professionals identified the substance as scopolamine in the lab tests. It is an alkaloid that comes from the nightshade family of plants. In very small doses, it is used to treat motion sickness, but in large doses, it is a powerful and dangerous deliriant. It blocks the formation of memories and the function of will. The victims were literally unable to form a single thought of resistance. It was a chemical weapon used for the purpose of greed. The Devil's Breath was a name that fit the drug perfectly. The turning point in the investigation happened in a luxury hotel. 3 bodies were discovered in a room on the 5th floor. They were all foreign tourists who had been out the night before. The scene was gruesome because the men had not just been robbed. They had been given a lethal overdose of the white powder. The criminals had been too aggressive with their delivery of the drug. The victims' hearts had simply stopped beating in the middle of the night. The robbery spree had now turned into a triple murder. The police realized they were dealing with a professional hit ring. These were not just random thieves looking for a quick score. They were organized and they had a very specific set of roles. Some women were the bait, while others were the muscle nearby. They had drivers and lookouts watching the street at all times. They were moving from hotel to hotel to avoid being tracked. The pressure to catch them was coming from the highest levels. The reputation of the entire country was at stake for them. Investigators began to focus on the pharmacies in the downtown area. Scopolamine is a controlled substance, but it was being sold illegally. Detectives went undercover to find the source of the chemical supply. They found that some shop owners were selling it under the table. They were providing the raw alkaloid to the gangs for a profit. This black market was the fuel for the entire crime wave. The police launched a massive crackdown on these small and dirty shops. They arrested dozens of people in a single week. The police set up a sting operation at a popular dance club. An undercover officer posed as a wealthy businessman from Spain. He wore a fake gold watch and carried a stack of cash. He sat at the bar and waited for the predators to arrive. Within 1 hour, 2 women approached him with wide and bright smiles. They began to flirt and ask him about his stay in Colombia. The officer kept a very close eye on their fast hands. He was waiting for the moment they reached for the white powder. One of the women pulled a small makeup compact from her bag. She pretended to check her reflection in the small glass mirror, but as she leaned in, she prepared to blow the dust. The undercover officer moved his head just in time to avoid it. His team moved in and tackled the women to the floor. They found several grams of the drug hidden in their clothing. This arrest led to the discovery of the main safe house. The police were finally inside the heart of the Black Widow ring that night. The safe house was filled with the belongings of many different victims. There were hundreds of passports and credit cards in the drawers. They found laptops and cameras and piles of expensive leather shoes. The women had been operating with a terrifying level of efficiency. They kept journals of their scores and the names of the men. They viewed their victims as nothing more than walking bank accounts. It was a cold and calculated business built on a foundation of poison. The scale of the theft was in the millions. Now I want you to really think about this for a moment. Imagine you are in a vibrant city and you are having fun. You meet someone who seems kind and interested in your life. You have no reason to suspect that they are a predator. Then, with a single breath, your entire life is no longer yours. You are walking and talking, but you are essentially a ghost. I do not know about you, but that is terrifying to me. It is the ultimate loss of a person's individual human soul in public. The sting of this case is how the drug was used. It was not used to knock you out like a common thief. It was used to make you a partner in your own robbery. You did the work for them while they watched and laughed. You opened the doors and you gave away all your secrets. That is a level of cruelty that is very hard to imagine. The very thing that makes us human was used as a weapon. Our ability to trust was turned into a massive and dark trap for us. The legal outcome of the case was a significant victory for the city. Several of the ringleaders were captured and brought to a trial. They were charged with kidnapping and robbery and the 3 murders. The evidence from the safe house was enough to convict them all. They were sentenced to more than 20 years in a high-security prison. The judge wanted to send a very clear message to other gangs. The use of scopolamine would be met with the full force of the law. The spree was over. The government of Colombia launched a massive travel advisory campaign. They warned every visitor about the dangers of accepting drinks or powder. They placed posters in every airport and hotel across the whole country. They wanted to make sure that no more tourists became zombies in the night. The crackdown on the pharmacies made the drug much harder to find. The epidemic began to fade as the criminals were locked away for good. But the shadow of the devil's breath still lingers in the air today. The aftermath of the spree left a permanent mark on the city. People in Medellin are now much more cautious with new acquaintances. The bars in El Poblado are still vibrant, but the vibe has changed. You will see people covering their drinks with their hands and eyes. The trust that was once so easy to find is now very hard. The victims who survived the drug still have gaps in their memory. They will never truly know what they did during those lost hours. They were once puppets. The rain continues to fall on the green hills of Medellin tonight. It washes the dust from the streets and the palms in the parks. The neon lights reflect in the puddles like bright and colorful ghosts. The city is much safer now than it was in 2007. But the story of the Burundanga spree is a lesson for us all. It reminds us that our minds are our most precious and fragile assets. We must protect them with everything we have in this world. The camera pulls away. The shoeless tourist struggled to find help on that first morning. He approached several people, but they thought he was just another drunk. They did not see the blank terror in his wide and dilated eyes. He could not explain that he was a victim of a chemical attack. He wandered for 3 miles before he found a police station door. Even then, he could only stare at the officers with a lost look. It took hours for the doctors to realize he was a medical miracle. He was alive, but broken. The borrachero tree grows wild in the countryside around the city of Medellin. It has long and beautiful white flowers that hang down like bells. The name of the tree literally means the one that makes you drunk. For centuries, the native people knew about the power of the seeds. They used them in small amounts for rituals and for medicine too. But the criminals of the modern city saw a different kind of use. They turned the natural plant into a concentrated and deadly tool of crime. It was a corruption. The 3 men who died in the luxury hotel were from Europe. They had come to Colombia to celebrate a friend's wedding that week. They were young and healthy and full of life when they went out. The dosage of scopolamine they received was far beyond the lethal limit. The poison had caused their respiratory systems to simply shut down in sleep. They were found by a maid who was coming to clean the room. The sight of the 3 peaceful-looking bodies was a trauma for her. They looked resting. The psychological trauma for the survivors was a very heavy burden to carry. Many of them suffered from vivid and terrifying night terrors for years. They felt a deep and constant sense of paranoia in public places. The idea that they had helped the robbers was the worst part. They felt like they had betrayed their own homes and their lives. They could not understand how they had been so willing to cooperate. The drug had stolen more than their money. It had stolen their self-respect and agency. The police investigation into the pharmacies revealed a very deep web of corruption. Some of the shop owners were paying off local officials to stay open. They were moving thousands of doses of the drug every single month. The raids uncovered large stashes of the chemical in simple aspirin bottles. It was a hidden industry that was thriving on the misery of others. The authorities had to purge their own ranks to stop the flow. It was a long and difficult battle to clean up the streets. The trial of the Black Widows was a major event in the local news. The women sat in the courtroom with cold and expressionless faces. They showed no remorse for the lives they had destroyed or the deaths. One witness described how they laughed while he emptied his own safe. They treated the entire process like a game of skill and luck. The judge was visibly angry as he read the final and long sentence. He called them a disgrace to the people of the city of Medellin. The travel advisories remain in place even many years after the spree ended. The threat of the devil's breath has not completely vanished from the world. It is a reminder that predators are always looking for a new way. They will use the latest technology or the oldest plants to get ahead. We must be aware of the world around us at all times. The story of the shoeless tourist is a warning for every traveler. Your mind is the only thing that truly belongs to you. Do not let anyone blow dust. The warm rain of Medellin stops falling as we pull away. We travel thousands of miles across the ocean to Africa. We leave the neon bars and the chemical zombies behind us. Our camera settles on the suburban streets of Johannesburg, South Africa. It is a bright and clear morning in August of 2007. The air is cool and smells like dry grass and car exhaust. We are standing in front of the gate of a school. This is a place where students usually feel very safe and secure. A group of teenagers stands near the cafeteria during a morning break. Suddenly, a boy wearing a terrifying latex mask walks onto the campus. The mask has a wide and twisted grin with dark eyes. He reaches into a long bag and pulls out a samurai sword. The polished metal blade catches the sunlight and glints with an edge. Before anyone can react, he swings the heavy sword at a student. The girl screams as the blade cuts deep into a classmate's neck. There is a sudden and absolute silence for 1 second. The silence is broken by a wave of screams and running feet. Students scramble to get away from the figure in the mask. Morn Harms does not stop after the first terrifying strike of the blade. He moves through the crowd with a slow and steady robotic pace. He swings the long sword again and hits another young student nearby. The campus is now a scene of total chaos and blind panic. Blood is splattered across the gray concrete of the busy lunch area. No one knows where to hide from the masked attacker. Was this a case of genuine possession or a mental health failure? Everyone wanted to know what could drive a student to such violence. The school went from a place of learning to a crime scene. Parents rushed to the gates while the police surrounded the building. They found a boy who claimed he was not acting alone. He said he was an instrument for a much darker power. The mystery of his motive would shock the entire nation for years. People began to look at their own children with new fear. Let us go back to August 18 of 2007. It was a typical Monday morning at the technical high school. The sun was shining and the students were preparing for their exams. The hallways were filled with the sound of lockers slamming and laughter. Teachers were busy organizing their classrooms for the first period of the day. It felt like any other start to a normal week in Africa. No one saw the darkness that was walking toward the front gate. The morning bell rang to signal the start of break. The Nick Diedericks Technical High School was a respected place of study. It sat in a quiet suburb where many families lived together peacefully. The students here were focused on learning trades and technical skills for careers. It was a close community where the teachers knew most of the kids. On a normal day, the biggest problem was a late homework assignment. The students felt a sense of pride in their uniform and school. They spent their breaks talking about sports and movies and weekend plans. It was a very grounded and safe environment. Morn Harms was a 16-year-old student at the school then. He was known as a quiet and very reserved young man. He did not have many friends and spent much time alone. Morn was very passionate about music and dark horror movies at home. He often wore black clothing and listened to heavy metal bands. His teachers thought he was just a typical moody teenager in phases. He never showed any signs of outward aggression toward his classmates before. He seemed like a boy who was simply lost in his world. Behind the scenes, Morn was becoming obsessed with much darker themes in life. He spent hours on the internet looking at rituals and ancient spells. He began to believe that he could gain power through dark acts. He collected masks and knives and hidden items in his bedroom drawers. His parents did not realize the depth of his secret interests then. They saw a boy who was quiet and perhaps a bit unhappy. They did not see the monster that was growing in his mind. He was slowly separating himself from the reality of his life. On that Monday morning, Morn arrived at school with a long bag. It was a black sports bag that looked very heavy and full. He walked through the gates with a very calm and steady focus. None of the teachers thought to ask him about the long bag. They assumed it was for a sports practice later that afternoon. Morn did not go to his first period class like he usually did. He spent the morning hours hiding in a bathroom stall by himself. He was waiting for the right moment to reveal his secret. Inside the bathroom, Morn began to prepare his body for the ritual. He took off his school sweater and put on a black jacket. He pulled out the latex mask and pulled it over his face. The rubber smelled like chemicals and felt very tight on his skin. He tied several small knives to his belt under the dark coat. Finally, he reached into the sports bag and gripped the sword handle. The samurai sword was long, and the metal was cold to touch. He felt a surge of energy as he held the weapon. The school bell rang to signal the start of the morning break. Hundreds of students poured out into the open courtyard for fresh air. Morn stepped out of the bathroom and into the bright sunlight. He was no longer a quiet student in a gray school uniform. He was now a masked figure carrying a large and deadly sword. He walked toward the group of teenagers standing near the cafeteria area. His heart was beating fast, but his hands were very steady then. He had practiced this moment in his head 1,000 times. Jacques Pretorius was a popular student who was standing with his friends. He did not see the masked figure approaching him from the side. Morn raised the samurai sword high above his head with both hands. He brought the blade down with a sudden and very violent force. The metal cut through the air and struck Jacques in the neck. The 16-year-old boy fell to the ground in an instant. His friends thought it was a joke until they saw the blood. The reality of the situation hit the crowd like a wave. The sound of screams filled the air as students began to run. Morn did not stop after the first strike on the young boy. He turned and swung the sword at another student standing nearby. The long blade caught a boy in the face and the head. People were falling over each other to get into the classrooms. The teachers heard the noise and ran out to see the horror. They saw a masked monster walking through the blood on the floor. It looked like a scene from a nightmare in a movie. The calm morning was completely gone. Morn continued his walk through the courtyard with the long sword raised. He managed to injure several more students before the teachers could act. One boy had a deep gash on his arm from the metal. Another student was struck in the back as he tried to flee. The masked attacker did not say a single word during the spree. He was silent and focused on the ritual he had planned out. The courtyard was a mess of dropped bags and spilled lunches. The smell of copper was strong in the dry morning air. A group of teachers finally managed to corner Morn in a hallway. They spoke to him in calm voices and asked him to stop. Morn looked at them through the holes in the terrifying latex mask. He suddenly dropped the samurai sword onto the hard-tiled floor. He sat down and waited for the police to arrive at school. He did not try to fight or run away from the scene. When the officers put on the handcuffs, he was very quiet. He seemed to be in a trance or a deep state. The mask was finally removed. The detectives took Morn to the station for a long interrogation session. They also sent a team to search his home in the suburb. They found his computer and began to look at his search history. Morn had been looking at occult websites for several months that year. He had downloaded images of demons and instructions for dark rituals too. The police found a collection of heavy metal music in his room. They began to build a profile of a very disturbed young man. He had been planning this attack for a very long time. In a hidden drawer, the police found several books on dark magic. These books were filled with handwritten notes in the margins by Morn. He had been studying the symbols and the prayers of old cults. He believed that he was being chosen for a very special task. The detectives realized this was not a typical school attack. It was a crime that was rooted in a very dark belief. The community was shocked to learn about the secrets in his room. It seemed that evil had been living right under their noses. During the interview, Morn made a statement that changed the whole case. He said that he was not the one who decided to kill. He claimed that the music he listened to was the true master. He told the detectives that the lyrics contained secret hidden codes. These codes were meant to trigger a spiritual change in his soul. He believed that by killing, he was completing a sacred dark task. He told the police that he was now a soldier of Satan. This claim sent a shockwave through the entire nation of Africa. Morn specifically mentioned the band Slipknot during his long and dark confession. He said their music and their masks were a major inspiration. He felt a deep connection to the themes of pain and rage. The media picked up on this detail and focused on the band. People began to blame the music for the death of the student. It triggered a massive debate about the influence of violent media today. Parents were terrified that their own kids were listening to the songs. The case became a symbol of a much larger social panic. The police were so concerned that they brought in a special unit. This was the Occult-Related Crimes Unit of the National Police Force. They were experts in rituals and crimes involving secret dark societies. They examined the symbols and the mask that Morn had used that day. They wanted to know if he was part of a larger group. They searched for any signs of a cult operating in the area. The investigation was moving into a world of shadows and deep myths. The case was no longer just about a single violent student. Detectives reconstructed the entire morning of the attack with Morn. He showed them exactly where he had stood while he was waiting. He had timed the bells to make sure the courtyard was full. He wanted the maximum number of people to witness his dark ritual. He had chosen the cafeteria area because it was a wide open space. There were very few places for the students to run or hide. He had planned his route through the school to cause the most fear. Every step he took was a cold and very calculated move. Morn described his movement as being guided by a powerful force. He felt as if he were watching himself from a distance then. He did not feel any of the normal emotions of a teenager. He did not feel fear or anger or even a sense of joy. He was simply a machine performing a task for his dark master. He walked with a steady pace that terrified the other students. He swung the sword with a precision that he had practiced often. He wanted the scene to look like a ritual act. He was obsessed with the image. The police were chilled by the lack of emotion in his voice. He talked about killing his classmate as if it were a chore. He did not show any regret for the life of Jacques Pretorius. He only talked about the ritual and the messages in the music. He was completely detached from the human reality of his violent actions. To him, the other students were just targets in a larger game. He felt that he had succeeded in his goal of showing power. The detectives realized they were dealing with a very broken mind. The darkness was deep. Psychologists were brought in to evaluate the mental state of Morn Harmsey. They found that he was suffering from a severe and deep crisis. He had used the occult to give his life a sense of meaning. The isolation and the dark themes had created a dangerous mix. He was not possessed by a demon, but by his own hidden rage. He had turned his pain into a weapon and his mask into a shield. The ritual was a way for him to feel like a god. The truth was that he was a lonely and very lost boy. The mask was a key part of his transformation into a monster. Without the latex rubber, he was just a 16-year-old student. He needed the mask to hide his own human face from the world. It allowed him to do things he could not do as Morne. When the police finally pulled it off, they saw a scared child. The power he felt with the sword was now completely gone away. He was facing the reality of a life behind bars for murder. The ritual had failed to give him the freedom he wanted. He was just a criminal now. Now, let us pause for a moment to really think about this. I want you to consider the small details of that morning. What if a teacher had asked him about that long black bag? What if a friend had noticed the mask in his locker earlier? A single question might have stopped this tragedy from ever happening. I do not know about you, but that fact is truly haunting. We walk past people every day, and we never truly know them. A small moment of attention could have changed the world for Jacques. It is a scary thought. Morn was charged with murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. The trial was followed by millions of people across South Africa. The courtroom was filled with the families of the victims and teachers. Morn sat in the dock with a very blank and empty expression. His lawyers tried to argue that he was not mentally fit then. They pointed to his obsession with the occult and the music codes, but the prosecution argued that he had planned the attack for weeks. He knew exactly what he was doing when he swung the sword. The judge did not believe that the music was the primary cause. He ruled that Morn was fully responsible for his own violent acts. He was found guilty on every single charge brought against him. The court sentenced him to a term of life in prison that day. The judge said the crime was premeditated and extremely cruel to all. Morn was taken away to begin his long and lonely sentence. He would spend decades thinking about the life he had destroyed. The legal system had provided a measure of justice for the school. The case was closed. The high school in Johannesburg was never the same after the killing. The courtyard where Jacques fell was turned into a small garden. Students and teachers struggled with the memory of the mask and sword. Many children were too afraid to go back to class for months. The school had to hire extra security and social workers for help. The community was left with a deep and very painful scar then. They had to learn how to feel safe in their own halls again. It was a long and difficult process of healing for everyone. The case led to a nationwide panic about the occult and music. Schools across South Africa began to ban certain types of clothing. They checked bags for masks and knives with a new intensity. The police continued to monitor groups for any signs of ritual activity. The debate about violent media and its impact on kids continued. People were looking for an easy answer to a very complex problem. They wanted to believe that a band or a book was the cause. The reality was much harder for the public to accept then. It was a human tragedy. A single samurai sword sits in an evidence locker in a police station. It is a cold and heavy reminder of a morning in August. The dry grass in Johannesburg continues to grow around the school. The memory of the boy in the mask will never fully fade away. Families still talk about the day that evil walked into the halls. We leave the suburban streets and the quiet high school behind. The camera pulls away from the southern tip of Africa tonight. We are moving across the ocean to a luxury villa in Spain. A freezer is waiting. We often think of luxury as a shield against the dark. We believe that money and status keep the world outside. In South Africa, the violence was loud and very public. But in the coastal town of Marbella, the secrets are quiet. They are hidden behind tall gates and thick white walls. The sun beats down on the Spanish coast every single day. People come here to forget their past and enjoy the heat. Yet, beneath one villa, there was a cold and frozen heart. It had been waiting in the dark for a long time. It was a secret kept in a box of ice. A team of Spanish police officers moved toward a large villa. They were wearing heavy black gear and carrying tactical rifles today. The sun was shining on the Mediterranean Sea just miles away. They expected to find a large stash of high-grade cocaine. The house belonged to a British man with a dark reputation. He was known for laundering money for the international drug trade. The officers used a heavy ram to break the front door. They rushed inside while shouting for everyone to get on the floor. The air inside the villa was cool and smelled of expensive lilies. The police quickly moved through the marble halls of the ground floor. They found the owner sitting calmly at a very long table. He did not look surprised to see the armed men there. The officers began a systematic search of every single private room. They looked behind paintings and under the heavy silk rugs today. They were searching for hidden panels or a secret wall safe, but the ground floor of the house was completely clean. There were no drugs or weapons or large stacks of cash. The commander felt that something was very wrong with this raid. Why would a drug lord keep a victim frozen for years? This was the question that would haunt the detectives for months. The villa was a place of extreme beauty and modern luxury. It had a private gym and a pool and a cinema. But the basement held a secret that was much more sinister. The police were looking for a shipment of white powder today. Instead, they found a block of ice with a human shape. It was a stark reminder of the cruelty of the trade. The glitz of Marbella was just a thin and pretty mask. Let us go back to September 2 of 2007. The Costa del Sol was crowded with thousands of summer tourists. The town of Marbella was the center of the high life. People drove expensive sports cars along the busy seaside roads there. The bars were filled with the rich and the famous elite. It was a place where anyone could be a secret millionaire. The British gang leader had lived in the villa for years. He was considered a successful businessman by all of his neighbors. No one saw the darkness that lived in his basement. The gang leader was a man who enjoyed the very finest things. He wore custom suits and drank wine that cost thousands of pounds. His villa was a fortress of glass and white stone walls. He had a staff of 10 people to maintain the grounds. They worked in the gardens and cleaned the massive pool daily. To the outside world, he was a pillar of the community. He donated money to local charities and hosted large garden parties, but his wealth was built on a foundation of human misery. He was a key player in a global drug syndicate. The business of moving drugs requires a very high level of trust. One mistake can cost a gang millions of pounds in revenue. The British leader was known for being a very strict man. He did not tolerate any failure or any loss of product. He used fear to keep his employees in a line today. Those who worked for him knew the stakes were very high. If a shipment vanished, the person responsible would also vanish away. It was a simple and brutal rule of the criminal world. The leader had a long memory for every single mistake. The police were acting on a very specific and secret tip. An informant had told them about a shipment in the house. He said the villa was being used as a hub. The officers expected to find kilograms of drugs in the cellar. They moved into the basement and found a very large room. It was filled with boxes of wine and expensive sports gear. In the corner sat a massive industrial freezer with a lock. The unit was humming with a low and steady electric pulse. It looked out of place in such a beautiful house. The officers used a crowbar to break the heavy metal lock. They expected to find bags of cocaine hidden inside the ice. When they pulled the lid back, a cloud of frost rose. The air in the basement became very cold and very sharp. Beneath a layer of frozen meat, they saw a human hand. The skin was a pale blue and covered in white frost. The officers stepped back as they realized what they had found. It was not a shipment of drugs, but a human body. The man had been frozen in a block of ice. The forensic team was called to the villa immediately that afternoon. They had to wait for the ice to melt slowly today. They used heat lamps to reveal the face of the victim. It was a man who looked to be in his 30s. He was wearing a tracksuit and a heavy gold chain. His eyes were wide open and filled with a silent terror. The detectives knew this was a professional execution from the start. The victim had been missing from the United Kingdom for years. He was a man named David who worked for the gang. David had been a mule who moved drugs across the border. He was supposed to deliver a large shipment to London then, but the shipment never arrived at the secret meeting spot today. David claimed that he had been robbed by a rival gang. The leader did not believe his story for a single second. He believed that David had stolen the product for himself then. The gang leader decided to make an example of the man. He wanted to show everyone what happens to a lying thief. The punishment would be long and very cold. The investigation revealed that David disappeared in 2005. His family had been looking for him for 2 long years. They thought he had started a new life in another country. In reality, he had never left the basement of the villa. The gang leader had kept him as a frozen trophy. He wanted to have a physical reminder of his power there. It was a way to show his associates the cost of failure. He would take people down to the basement to see the box. The freezer was a tool of psychological and physical terror. The detectives found that the freezer was always kept running today. It had been moved from 3 different houses over the years. The leader was obsessed with keeping his insurance in the ice. He viewed the body as a piece of property he owned. It was a trophy from a war that he was winning then. The cruelty of the act shocked even the most veteran officers. They had seen many drug killings in the town of Marbella, but keeping a man in a freezer was a new level. It was a cold and very calculated act of evil. The turning point came when the medical examiner finished the report. The autopsy showed that David had died from extreme core cold. There were no bullet wounds or knife marks on his body. This meant that David was alive when he entered the box. He had been placed inside the freezer while he was awake. He had spent his final moments scratching at the thick walls. The forensic team found skin under his frozen fingernails today. He had fought to get out until his heart stopped beating. The leader had watched him die through the glass lid. The reenactment of the crime was a very dark and grim task. The detectives imagined the leader and his men in the cellar. They had led David down the stairs in the middle night. He likely thought he was going to be questioned or beaten. Instead, they forced him into the large industrial cooling unit. They held the lid down until the heavy lock was clicked. David was left alone in the dark with the rising frost. He could hear the humming of the machine as he died. The leader then went back upstairs to drink his wine. The leader used the body to control his other mule drivers. He would often tell them that David was still watching them. It was a dark joke that kept everyone in a state of fear. The freezer was a constant presence in the life of the gang. It sat in the basement of every luxury villa they rented. The frost was a symbol of the leader's absolute and cold will. He felt that he was untouchable behind his white stone walls. He believed the police would never think to look in ice. He was wrong about his own safety that September. The police arrested the British leader on the spot that afternoon. They also picked up several of his high-level gang associates. The villa was searched for 3 more days by the team. They found ledgers that detailed the drug shipments and the money. They also found photos of other victims who had vanished away. The leader sat in his cell with the same calm face. He did not show any regret for the death of David then. He seemed more upset about losing his expensive and large house. He was a man with no human heart left. Now I want you to really think about this for a moment. Imagine living in a house with a body in the basement. You are eating dinner and laughing while a man is frozen. I do not know about you, but that is truly sick. We walk past people in luxury and we think they are happy. But some of them are living with the ultimate dark secret. They have traded their humanity for a pile of dirty money. The ice in that freezer was not just for the victim. It was a reflection of the man who owned the house. You and I see a monster when we look at the leader. We see a person who has lost all sense of right. But in his world, this was just a business decision today. He felt that David was a debt that had to be paid. The cruelty was just a way to ensure his future profits. It is a terrifying look into the mind of a predator. They do not feel empathy or the pain of other people. They only feel the need to win and to stay on top. The coldness of the basement was always in his soul. The legal outcome of the case was a massive victory for law. The British leader was extradited back to the United Kingdom then. He was charged with murder and conspiracy to supply heavy drugs. The evidence from the freezer was a key part of the trial. The jury spent only 3 hours deciding on the final verdict. He was sentenced to a term of life in prison today. He will never again see the sun on the Spanish coast. He will spend his days in a small and gray cell. The frozen trophy had finally brought him down to earth. The family of David was finally able to have a funeral service. They buried him in a quiet cemetery in his hometown. The mystery of his disappearance was finally over for his mother. She had spent 2 years wondering if he was still alive. The truth was far worse than anything she had imagined then, but she at least had a place to visit her son. The story of the body in the freezer hit the news. It became a warning about the reality of the drug trade. It is not all fast cars and bright lights. The villa in Marbella sat empty for a long time after the raid. The neighbors refused to look at the house as they passed. They remembered the parties and the laughter of the gang leader. They felt a sense of shame for ever being his friend. The local police increased their patrols in the upscale areas today. They wanted to make sure no more frozen secrets were hidden. The glitz of the Costa del Sol was stained by the case. People realized that the most dangerous men live in the best houses. The sun still shines on the Mediterranean Sea tonight. The industrial freezer was taken away by the police as evidence. It sits in a warehouse as a cold and heavy reminder. The humming of the machine is silent now, and the ice is gone. But the memory of what was inside will never be erased. The story of David is a tragedy of a life wasted for crime. He was a mule who became a frozen trophy for a boss. It is a reminder that the world of drugs is a trap. Once you enter the basement, you may never come back out. The camera pulls away from the villa. The rain in Marbella is very rare in the month of September. But tonight, a light mist is falling over the white stone. It washes the dust from the marble stairs of the house. The tall gates are locked, and the pool is very dark now. The gang leader is far away in a cold stone prison. He no longer has his custom suits or his expensive wine. He only has the memory of the humming machine in the dark. The secrets of the basement have been brought to the light. The ice has melted away, and the truth remains. The investigation into the international drug ring continued for years. The police used the ledgers to track down dozens of other men. They dismantled the network that David had been a small part of then. It was one of the largest busts in the history of Spain. The gang leader had thought he was a genius of crime. He thought his frozen insurance would protect his massive illegal empire. Instead, it was the very thing that led to his downfall. He had kept his own destruction in a box in the basement. He was a fool. The story of the Marbella freezer remains a legend in the town. People tell it to the new residents as a warning of life. They want them to know that luxury can be a mask. You never truly know who is living behind the tall gates. The man who seemed like a pillar was a cold killer. The villa is now owned by a family from Germany today. They have completely renovated the basement and removed the old cooling units. They want to forget the history of the white stone walls. But the earth remembers the cold. The British mule was just one of many who lost their lives. The drug trade is a machine that consumes every single person. David was a victim of his own choices and his boss. He thought he could make a quick fortune and then leave. He did not realize that there is no exit from the gang. The leader had total control over his life and his death. The freezer was the final cage for a man who wanted more. It is a grim end to a very short and dark story. The humming has finally stopped for good now. We look at the villa one last time before we move on. The lights are out and the street is completely silent tonight. The sea air is warm and smells of salt and old stone. The secrets of Marbella are safe for now in the dark. But we know that the world is full of hidden rooms. Every house has a history and every person has a deep secret. Some are small and others are as cold as a block of ice. We must always be careful of what we find in the basement. The camera moves away to China. The poison dumplings scandal is waiting for us in the east. We move from the cold of a freezer to the cold of food. It is a story of a needle and a silent poison. A family is sitting down for dinner in a quiet home. They have no idea that their food is a deadly weapon. One man's anger has traveled thousands of miles across the deep sea. It is a subtle and very different kind of mass violence. The rain is falling over the factory in the Hebei province. We are standing in the frozen food aisle. We leave the dark secrets of the Spanish coast behind us tonight. The camera travels thousands of miles across the deep blue ocean. It moves away from the villas and toward the island of Japan. We are looking for a different kind of frozen mystery now. In Marbella, the ice was used to hide a single body. In this case, the ice was inside a simple grocery store. A family is picking out a bag of frozen dumplings for dinner. They believe that the food they buy is safe and healthy. The rain falls over the quiet streets of a Japanese suburb. A young child in Japan sits down for a quick evening meal. His mother serves him a plate of warm and steaming dumplings. He takes one bite and suddenly his entire body begins to shake. His face turns a deep blue and he cannot draw any air. He collapses onto the kitchen floor while his parents scream for help. Within minutes, he is in the back of a fast ambulance. His heart is racing and his lungs are starting to fill with fluid. This was not a typical case of sudden food poisoning. It was the first sign of a massive international crime. How did a toxic pesticide end up inside a sealed food package? The dumplings had traveled thousands of miles from a factory in China. They were sealed in plastic and kept in a deep freeze. There were no visible holes or tears in the colorful outer wrapping. Yet a deadly poison was lurking inside the dough and the meat. This was an act of industrial sabotage that targeted innocent people. The world was about to face a massive crisis of food safety. Every single bag was now a potential and silent weapon. A single grudge had crossed an ocean. Let us go back to December of the year 2007. This was a time of massive growth in the global food trade. Japan imported billions of pounds of food from its neighbor every year. Busy workers relied on these frozen meals for their daily nutrition. The dumplings were a staple in almost every single household in Japan. They were cheap and easy to prepare in just a few minutes. No one ever thought to question the safety of the supply chain. The relationship between the two nations was built on mutual trust and trade. The factory was located in the Hebei province of northern China. Hundreds of workers spent their days on a massive assembly line. They wore white coats and masks to keep the food clean. The facility produced thousands of bags of frozen dumplings every single day. Most of these bags were packed into shipping containers for the sea. They were sent across the water to the grocery stores of Japan. The workers were often tired and felt the pressure of the quotas. One man in particular was starting to feel a deep resentment. He was a disgruntled employee who felt he was being treated poorly. He believed his wages were too low for the long hours worked. His boss had recently denied him a raise and a vacation too. He watched the bags of food move past him on the belt. He realized how much the company valued the product over the people. A dark plan began to form in his mind that winter. He wanted to hurt the company in a way they would notice. He did not care about the people who would eat the food. By the end of December, 10 people had fallen violently ill. They all lived in different cities across the island of Japan. Doctors noticed that their symptoms were very consistent and very severe. They suffered from blurred vision and heavy vomiting and respiratory failure. The common link between all of them was the frozen dumplings. The Japanese government issued an immediate recall of all the imported food. Thousands of bags were pulled from the shelves in a single day. The public was warned to throw away any packages in their freezers. Forensic laboratories began to test the contents of the frozen bags. They found high levels of a toxic chemical called methimidopos inside. This substance is a powerful pesticide used on large-scale farms. It is not something that should ever be near human food. A tiny amount is enough to cause permanent damage or death. The scientists were shocked by the concentration of the poison in the dough. It was clear that this was not a natural environmental accident. Someone had deliberately added the pesticide to the food in the factory. The discovery triggered an international investigation involving two powerful nations. The Chinese authorities inspected the factory in the Hebei province for leaks. They checked the water and the air and the raw ingredients too. They found no evidence of the pesticide anywhere in the production area. The factory management insisted that their security was the best in the region. They suggested that the poison was added after the bags left China. This caused a massive rift in the trade relations between the countries. The tension was rising as more people became sick. The Japanese investigators were not satisfied with the answers they received. They took the tainted bags back to their own high-technology labs. They wanted to know exactly how the poison got inside the plastic. They used powerful microscopes to examine every inch of the packaging material. They found something that changed the course of the whole case. There were tiny and almost invisible puncture marks on the sealed bags. These holes were exactly the size of a medical syringe needle. The poison had been injected into the finished product. This meant the crime happened after the dumplings were packed and sealed. The perpetrator had to be someone with access to the cold storage. They had to be able to move unnoticed among the crates. The police began to interview every single worker at the Hebei plant. They looked for anyone who had a history of disciplinary issues. They checked for people who had access to agricultural chemicals at home. The list of suspects was long, and the pressure was immense. The safety of millions of people was at stake that winter. The investigators focused on a man named Lu Yueding that year. He was a quiet worker who had been at the factory long. He had been seen lingering near the storage area after hours. When the police searched his small home, they found very dark clues. He had a collection of syringes and bottles of the pesticide. He also had a diary where he wrote about his anger. He wanted to get revenge on his bosses for his low pay. He chose the most popular product to ensure maximum damage occurred. Lu had been sneaking into the warehouse during his night shifts. He would find the crates that were destined for the Japanese market. He used a needle to inject the pesticide into the bags. He moved quickly and carefully to avoid being seen by the guards. He did not target a specific person or a specific family. He just wanted to cause a massive scandal for his employer. He watched the news of the poisonings with a sense of pride. He felt that he had finally made his voice heard. The scale of the sabotage was far greater than he expected. Hundreds of people in Japan were eventually affected by the toxic food. The entire industry was brought to a standstill for many months. The financial loss for the company was in the millions of pounds. Liu had succeeded in his goal of hurting the factory owners, but he had also poisoned children and elderly people across the sea. He had turned a simple dinner into a game of death. He was a man consumed by a very petty and dark rage. Now let us pause for a moment to really think. This is a case of deep and very tragic irony. We live in a world where we are more connected than ever. A man in a small town in China can affect a family in Japan. He used his position of trust to poison the entire world. I do not know about you, but that fact is terrifying. We trust the people who handle our food to be professional. But here, one person's anger was enough to break that sacred bond. It is a very cold and steady type of violence. Think about the journey that one single dumpling took that year. It was made with care and frozen to keep it fresh. It was shipped across the sea to a bright grocery store. A mother bought it because she wanted to feed her family. She thought she was doing something good for her young child. But the food was a trap set by a man she never met. The irony is that the more we trust our systems, the more vulnerable we become. One small needle was enough to poison the trust of two nations. Liu was eventually caught after a long and very difficult investigation. He was brought to a trial in a Chinese court of law. The evidence of the syringes and the pesticide was completely overwhelming. He confessed to the crimes and showed no remorse for the victims. He believed that the factory owners were the true criminals in life. The judge did not agree with his twisted logic that day. He was found guilty of endangering public safety and causing harm. The legal system was ready to deliver a final and heavy blow. The court sentenced Liu to life in prison for his many crimes. He would spend the rest of his days in a small cell. He would have plenty of time to think about his anger. The company he tried to destroy was forced to close its doors. Thousands of innocent workers lost their jobs because of his single act. The economic impact was felt across the entire Hebei province for years. The man who wanted to help himself had hurt everyone else. It was a complete and total failure of his dark plan. The poisoning scandal triggered a global rethink of food supply security. Countries began to install more cameras and better sensors in factories. They started to use tamper-evident packaging for all frozen goods. The relationship between China and Japan took years to fully recover. People were afraid to buy imported food for a very long time. The memory of the sick child in the kitchen stayed with them. The dumplings were no longer a symbol of a quick and easy meal. They were a reminder of a very hidden and dark danger. The aftermath of the case left a lingering sense of deep suspicion. People now look for the tiny holes in the plastic bags they buy. They want to know that their food has not been touched. The trust that was broken in 2007 is still fragile. We realize that the people behind the scenes have a lot of power. One disgruntled person can change the world with a single needle. We are all connected by the things we eat and the things we buy. It is a reality that is hard to swallow. The child who collapsed in the kitchen survived his long ordeal. He spent weeks in the hospital recovering from the toxic pesticide. He has to live with the long-term effects on his health. His mother never bought frozen dumplings from that company again in life. She still remembers the smell of the steam on that dark night. The family moved on, but they are much more careful now. They know that the world is a much smaller place than it seems. Danger can travel thousands of miles in a simple frozen bag. The factory in Hebei is a quiet and empty ruin today. The machines are covered in dust and the lights are out. The rain falls on the roof and leaks into the warehouse. The assembly line that moved thousands of bags is now silent. It is a monument to the anger of one single man. Liu Yueding is just a name in a cold legal file. His act of sabotage is taught in schools of food safety. It is a story of how one needle can stop a nation. The camera pulls away from China. The Hollow Point hijacking is our next stop in the south. We move from the subtle poison of a needle to power. It is a story of a street in Sao Paulo and a truck. A group of men are waiting with military-grade sniper rifles. They do not want to poison anyone, but they want the cash. They use rounds designed to pierce the armor of a tank. The sound of the shots is like a hammer hitting steel. The rain is falling over the busy streets of the city. We are standing on a corner. The sound of the rain is a constant and steady rhythm. It covers the noise of the busy traffic in the street. We are watching an armored truck as it moves slowly along. The guards inside feel safe behind the thick and heavy glass. They believe that their armor is enough to stop any bullet, but they have never seen a rifle like this before today. The gang has a plan that involves a very specific weapon. They are not looking for a quick score, but a war. The hollow point hijacking is starting right now. The driver of the truck looks in his side mirror and sees it. A black SUV is following him very closely in the lane. He signals for his partner to keep a sharp eye out. They have moved millions of pounds of cash in this truck. They know that they are a target for the local gangs, but they have a schedule to keep and a bank to reach. They turn onto a quiet street in the Pinheiros district. Suddenly, the black SUV speeds up and cuts them off. The driver slams on the heavy and loud brakes. 4 men jump out of the SUV with long black bags. They do not look like common street thieves from the area. They move with a military precision and a cold, steady focus. They pull out rifles that are almost 5 feet long today. These are weapons designed for the battlefield and for long range. They take a kneeling position and aim at the armored truck. The guards inside are calling for help on the radio now. They believe the glass will hold against the small rounds. They are wrong. The tiny prick of a needle in a factory feels like a silent ghost. It is a quiet and very subtle way to cause a massive tragedy. But now we move to a place where the violence is incredibly loud. We are traveling from the island of Japan to the city of Sao Paulo. The rain is falling over the crowded streets of Brazil tonight. It is a heavy and warm tropical rain that hits the pavement hard. We are moving from the invisible poison to the overwhelming power of steel. A .50 caliber rifle is waiting in the back of a black car. Inside the armored truck, the 2 security guards felt completely and totally safe. They were sitting behind layers of thick glass and heavy reinforced steel plate. They had moved millions of pounds of cash through these streets before today. Their vehicle was designed to stop rounds from any common street handgun. They believed that no criminal in the city could ever touch them here. Then, a sudden and massive boom echoed through the entire quiet cabin. A hole the size of a fist appeared in the bulletproof front window. The glass had failed them in a single and terrifying second. How did a local street gang get their hands on military-grade weapons? These were rifles designed to disable tanks and pierce through thick aircraft armor. The guards inside the truck were now facing a terrifying and new reality. They were no longer in a fortress, but in a metal trap. The criminals outside were not playing by the old rules of the street. They had planned a military strike in the middle of a busy city. The mystery of their firepower would shock the entire nation of Brazil. It was an escalating arms race with no clear ceiling. Let us go back to June 23 of 2007. It was a bright and very sunny morning in the heart of Sao Paulo. The district of Pinheiros was filled with people walking to their office jobs. The traffic was moving with its usual slow and very rhythmic pulse. An armored truck began its routine run to deliver cash to the banks. The guards were drinking coffee and talking about the football game last night. It was a morning that felt exactly like 1,000 others before. They had no idea that they were being watched closely. The security firm had a very strict set of rules for their routes. They never took the same street twice in a single week of work. They had GPS trackers and high-frequency radios to call for help. The guards were trained to handle a variety of dangerous and sudden situations. They felt like they were the kings of the road in their truck. To them, the city was a place they navigated with total and complete confidence. They did not see the black SUV following them 3 cars back. The predator was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The truck turned onto a side street that was slightly less crowded today. Suddenly, the black SUV sped up and pulled directly in front of them. The driver of the truck slammed on the brakes and reached for his radio. He saw 4 men jump out of the vehicle with very long bags. They did not look like the desperate thieves he usually saw in town. They moved with a steady and very professional military grace and focus. They unzipped the bags and pulled out rifles that were 5 feet long. The guards froze in their seats with sudden fear. One of the gunmen took a kneeling position on the hot asphalt road. He rested the heavy barrel of the 50 caliber rifle on the hood. He took a long and very careful aim at the driver's window. He pulled the trigger, and a massive flame shot out of the muzzle. The sound was like a thunderclap that shook the buildings on the block. The heavy round punched through the armored glass like it was simple paper. The driver ducked down as shards of glass sprayed across the small cabin. They were under a high-stakes and professional attack. The gunmen fired 3 more rounds into the engine block of the truck. The massive bullets shredded the heavy metal and the cooling lines in seconds. The truck let out a loud hiss of steam and came to a stop. The guards were trapped inside a vehicle that could no longer move away. They watched through the mirrors as the men approached with heavy explosive charges. The robbers were not interested in a long and difficult standoff today. They wanted the money, and they wanted to leave the area fast. They were working against a very tight and professional clock. The thieves placed a small and powerful charge on the back door handle. They stepped back and detonated the explosive with a remote trigger device. The heavy steel door was blown open and hit the pavement hard. The guards inside the truck were stunned by the blast and the noise. The gunmen climbed inside and pointed their shorter weapons at the terrified men. They did not say a word as they began to move the bags. They worked in a silent and very coordinated dance of professional theft. Millions of pounds of cash were moved in minutes. The gang loaded the heavy bags into the back of the SUV quickly. They did not bother to take the smaller coins or the paperwork. They only wanted the high-value banknotes that were easy to carry away. Within 5 minutes of the first shot, the SUV was speeding off. They vanished into the complex maze of the Sao Paulo traffic system. The police arrived shortly after, but the street was already very quiet. All that remained was a shredded truck and several massive shell casings. The crime scene was a testament to a new power. The investigation into the hijacking began with a look at the shell casings. The police ballistics experts were shocked by the size of the rounds found. These were not bullets that could be bought in any local shop. They were military surplus items that had been smuggled across the border recently. The rifles themselves were expensive and required a high level of training. The detectives realized they were dealing with the PCC crime syndicate today. This was the most powerful and organized gang in the entire country. They were now using the weapons of a modern war. The detectives realized the gang had been incredibly lucky with the timing. They had intercepted the truck at its most vulnerable and quiet point. This suggested that they had inside information about the specific daily route. The police began to look at the employees of the security firm. They checked the phone records and the bank accounts of every guard. They were looking for a mole who had sold out his partners. It was the only way the gang could have planned the hit. The search led them to a quiet man in dispatch. The dispatcher was a long-term employee with no history of any trouble. But when the police searched his small apartment, they found the truth. They discovered a hidden burner phone and detailed blueprints of the trucks. He had been sending the daily route schedules to the gang leaders. He had been paid a massive sum of money for his betrayal. He told the police that the gang had threatened his whole family. He felt he had no choice but to help them that month. The locking clue was a map with a red circle. The investigation led the police to a safe house in the suburbs. They found several more of the 50 caliber rifles in a basement. The gang was preparing for a series of even more aggressive hits. They wanted to dominate the entire cash transport industry in the city. The firepower they possessed was enough to challenge the local police force. It was a terrifying look into the future of urban crime today. The detectives were racing to stop the next attack before it happened. The city felt like it was on the edge of a war. The reenactment of the crime showed how the PCC unit operated that day. They had used scouts on motorcycles to track the truck from start. They had timed the traffic lights to ensure the SUV was close. The gunmen had practiced with the heavy rifles at a remote range. They knew exactly where to hit the truck to disable the engine. Every single move was calculated to minimize their risk and maximize gain. It was a display of criminal efficiency that was truly haunting. They were operating like a special forces team in the street. Now, let us pause for a moment to really think about this. I want you to consider the arms race between law and crime. The security company spent millions of pounds to make a safe truck. They used the best steel and the thickest glass in the world. But the criminals simply bought a bigger and more powerful gun today. I do not know about you, but that reality is very scary. No matter how high you build your walls, someone will find a way. It is a part of human nature that never seems to change. We believe that technology and armor can protect us from every single threat. But in Sao Paulo, the PCC showed that there is no perfect shield. They used a tool designed for a battlefield on a city street. This shift in perspective is what makes this case so chilling today. We are all living in a world where the rules can change fast. The very people who are supposed to protect us are often outgunned. It makes you wonder what the next step in the race will be. The greed of man has a very long reach. The legal outcome of the case was a mixture of victory and loss. Several of the lower-level gang members were killed in shootouts. The police were forced to use their own heavy weapons to win. The dispatcher was sentenced to a long term in a federal prison. However, the high-level leaders of the PCC remained free and safe. The millions of pounds stolen were never recovered by the local police. The money had vanished into the vast and dark criminal underworld. The city was left with the holes in the truck. The aftermath of the hijacking forced a massive change in the police. The Brazilian authorities had to upgrade their own armor and their rifles. They created new specialized units to guard the cash transport routes daily. The security firms began to use drones and decoys to confuse gangs. The Hollow Point hijacking had permanently changed the face of crime today. People in Sao Paulo now look at armored trucks with new eyes. They know that the steel is not as strong as it looks. The memory of the boom remains in the air. The two guards who survived the attack never went back to work. They suffered from severe trauma and a deep fear of the street. The sound of a car backfiring would send them into a panic. They felt that their sense of safety had been shattered by the glass. The company paid for their medical care, but the damage was deep. They were the human cost of a war they did not choose. They were just men trying to do a job in a city. The .50 caliber rifle had stolen more than just the cash. The spent shell casing from the street sits in a glass case. It is a piece of evidence that tells a very dark story today. It is a heavy and brass reminder of the power of the gang. The rain continues to fall on the district of Pinheiros tonight. The streets are busy, and the neon lights reflect in the water. Armored trucks still move through the traffic with their secret loads, but they move with a new sense of caution and a fear. They know that a black SUV might be waiting around the corner. The dispatcher who sold the routes still sits in a quiet cell. He thinks about the money that he never got to spend that year. He thinks about the men he worked with for 10 long years. He traded his soul for a burner phone and a dark promise. The PCC moved on to the next target and the next big score. They do not care about the man who helped them in the start. He was just a tool to be used and then thrown away. The hierarchy of the street is cold and very absolute. The story of the Sao Paulo hijacking is a lesson in the arms race. It shows that crime is always looking for a bigger and better gun. It shows that the inside threat is often the most dangerous one. We must be aware of the gaps in our own thick and heavy armor. The world is not as secure as we like to believe it is. We are all vulnerable to a person with a plan and power. The camera pulls away from the wet streets of Brazil now. We are heading to the coast of Lebanon. The sultry spy and the judge are waiting for us in the east. We move from the direct fire of a rifle to a bomb. It is a story of a sunset and a massive and dark blast. A car is thrown into the air like a piece of light paper. It is a political hit that was planned for many long weeks. The tension in Beirut is reaching a breaking point in the sun. We are standing on the beautiful and busy seafront road today. The smell of salt and old smoke is in the breeze. We leave the wet streets of Brazil and fly toward the Far East. Our camera travels over the vast blue ocean to the ancient Middle East today. We settle on the bright edge of the Mediterranean Sea right now at sunset. The city of Beirut is a place of deep and very complex human history. The sun is setting over the deep and dark blue water on the coast. The waves hit the sandy shore with a very slow and steady rhythmic beat. A silver luxury car sits parked in the warm and salt evening air alone. A massive explosion suddenly rocks the entire Beirut seafront area without any warning. The sound is louder than 1,000 heavy military cannon shots in the air. It shatters the glass windows of every tall building nearby for several blocks. A luxury car is thrown hundreds of feet into the blue sky like a toy. The vehicle flies over the wide road and hits a large metal wheel structure. It becomes wedged in the frame of a Ferris wheel near the ocean waves. A cloud of thick black smoke rises over the dark water right now. Why would a professional hit squad target a senior judge in such public view? Walid Aido was a man of very high status in the city of Beirut. He was a member of parliament and a powerful legal voice for justice. He was known for his sharp mind and his incredible courage in the face. But in this city, power is a very dangerous and heavy gift to hold. Someone wanted to send a terrifying message to the entire nation of Lebanon. They did not just want him dead today in a secret dark alley. Let us go back to the date of June 13, 2007. It was a beautiful and very sunny day in the heart of Beirut City. This place was once known as the Paris of the Middle East region. The streets are filled with expensive cafes and a very vibrant culture of life. People were enjoying the warm weather and the breeze from the deep blue sea. Walid Aido was finishing his afternoon at a private beach club with his family. He felt a rare sense of peace as the sun began to set. Walid Aido lived a life that was governed by a very strict routine. He was 74 years old and he still worked with great energy daily. He spent his mornings in the halls of the parliament building in the city. He was a vocal critic of the foreign influence in his beloved country today. This made him a target for many powerful and very hidden dark forces. He knew that his life was in constant danger from the invisible shadows. He traveled with a team of professional bodyguards to keep him safe always. On this evening, Walid was accompanied by his oldest and beloved son, Khalid. They had spent the afternoon talking and relaxing near the cool salt water. Khalid was a bright young man who had a very successful career ahead. They walked toward the parking lot of the military beach club together slowly. The guards checked the perimeter of the silver car for any signs of trouble. Everything seemed to be normal and quiet in the warm evening light today. The waves continued to hit the shore with a steady and calm beat. The silver luxury car was a symbol of his status and his hard work. It was a heavy and well-built vehicle designed for comfort and speed. The bodyguards opened the doors, and the men settled into the soft leather seats. They were planning to go home for a quiet dinner with the family. Walid sat in the front seat while his son sat directly behind him. The driver turned the key in the ignition to start the powerful engine. That single and simple action triggered a hidden device buried in the chassis. The bomb was filled with several pounds of military-grade RDX high explosives. It was placed directly under the driver's seat for maximum and lethal effect today. The blast was directed upward with a violent and incredible force of hot gas. It tore through the heavy floor of the car like it was paper. The heat was intense enough to melt the metal and the glass instantly. Walid Aido and his son were killed in the first second of the blast. The bodyguards outside were also caught in the massive and expanding fire. The physics of the explosion were truly terrifying to the investigators on the scene. The force was enough to lift the entire car off the asphalt road. It acted like a rocket engine for a brief and very violent moment. The vehicle traveled through the air and over a high metal security fence. It slammed into the structure of a nearby Ferris wheel with a crash. The car remained wedged between the colorful passenger cars of the amusement ride. It was a surreal and horrific image against the setting orange sun. The initial chaos on the seafront was a scene of total and blind panic. People who were walking their dogs ran for cover behind the stone walls. The sound of the blast had been heard for miles across the city. First responders arrived to find a massive crater in the middle of road. The air was thick with the smell of burning rubber and hot metal. They looked up and saw the burning car hanging from the Ferris wheel. It took hours for the fire crews to reach the high wreck. The investigation into the assassination began before the smoke had even cleared the air. Forensic teams from the National Army moved in to secure the wide area. They were looking for any piece of the detonator or the explosive material. They found that the killers had used a very sophisticated remote trigger device. This allowed the assassins to watch from a distance and choose the moment. They waited until the car was in a specific spot to hit it. This was not a random act, but a very precise strike. Walid Ido was a key member of the anti-Syrian political movement in Lebanon. He had been working to end the outside control of his home nation. This put him at the center of a very dangerous and dark game. Several of his close colleagues had been murdered in a similar way recently. The city was gripped by what people called the season of the car bombs. It was a systematic cleansing of the leaders who wanted a free country. The message was clear to everyone who dared to speak out. The international community was shocked by the brutality of the June 13th attack. Investigators from the United Nations were called in to provide technical help today. They confirmed that the RDX was of a type only used by militaries. This suggested that a state-sponsored hit squad was behind the entire operation. Common criminals in Beirut did not have access to such powerful explosive tools. The trail led back to the professional intelligence agencies of the neighboring state. They had been tracking Walid Ido for many long and quiet weeks. The hit squad had likely used a safe house near the beach club. They watched his movements and learned the schedule of his daily security team. They knew exactly which car he would be using on that Wednesday evening. One of the assassins managed to slip into the parking lot at night. They placed the magnetic bomb under the car in less than a minute. They were ghosts who moved through the shadows with total and silent confidence. They were experts in the art of the political and public murder. A critical turning point in the case came from a grainy camera feed. The police found footage of a black car following Walid for weeks. The vehicle had fake license plates that were traced to a stolen car. It had been parked near the beach club every day for a month. The men inside were never seen clearly through the dark, tinted glass windows. They were the ones who held the remote trigger in their hands. They watched the judge enter the car, and they pressed the button. Now let us pause for a moment to really think about this. Walid Ido spent his whole life fighting for the rule of the law. He believed that the truth was the most powerful weapon in the world. But in Beirut, he was facing an enemy that only understood violent force. I do not know about you, but that is a heavy thought. Imagine being a judge and knowing that your car is a potential bomb. You have to walk to work every day with a target on back. It is a level of pressure that most people cannot handle. Think about the sheer cruelty of killing a man and his son together. The assassins did not care about the innocent life of young Walid Ido. They only cared about the political message they were sending to the public. The image of the car and the Ferris wheel was meant to scare. It was a symbol of how the old world of law was broken. The very things we use for joy were turned into a nightmare. It is a deep and very dark irony that stays with you. Justice was wedged in the frame of a child's ride. The legal outcome of the case was a very familiar and sad story. No one was ever officially charged or brought to a trial for murder. The assassins vanished back across the border into the shadows of the state. They were protected by the very people who had sent them to Beirut. The investigation was eventually closed due to a lack of any new leads. In Lebanon, this is known as the wall of total and absolute impunity. The killers of the truth are often the ones who hold power. The aftermath of the bombing led to a new wave of civil unrest. Protests filled the streets of the city for many long and loud weeks. People demanded an end to the assassinations and the foreign interference today. They carried photos of Walid Ido and his son through the dark smoke. The judge became a martyr for the cause of a free and fair nation. His death only served to make the movement for justice even stronger. The killers had failed to silence the voice of the people completely. The Ferris wheel on the Beirut seafront was eventually repaired and painted bright. But the people who live there never forget what they saw that day. They look at the colorful cars and remember the silver luxury wreck. The image of the blast is etched into the memory of the city. The sun still sets over the Mediterranean Sea with a beautiful orange glow. The waves still hit the sandy shore with a very steady beat, but the air feels a little bit heavier on the scenic road. The murder of Walid Ido was a tragedy of a very high scale. It showed the world the cost of standing up for a belief. He knew the risks, and he chose to stay in Beirut anyway. He was a man of the law until the very final second. His son Khalid was a victim of a war he did not start. They are buried together in a quiet cemetery in the ancient city. The rain falls on their white stone markers in the winter months. The truth remains, even when the voices are silenced. We move away from the smoke and the Ferris wheel of Lebanon. The camera travels across the deep sea to the islands of Philippines. We are looking for a different kind of disappearance and a secret. A woman has vanished during a bitter legal battle over her children. The search will last for 2 long and very painful years for all. But the truth is hidden in a rusted steel drum in Manila. It is encased in a block of heavy and solid concrete today. The Black Dahlia of the East is waiting for us. The water of Manila Bay is dark and very murky in the night. Divers are moving through the silt on the bottom of the ocean floor. They are looking for a specific item that was dropped from a boat. They find a heavy barrel that is covered in barnacles and seaweed. It is far too heavy for a single man to lift to surface. They have to use a winch to pull it into the air today. The smell of the ocean is thick and salty in the heat. A secret is about to be revealed. Ruby Rose Barrameda was a mother who loved her 2 young children dearly. She was caught in a legal war that felt like a nightmare. She went to a meeting in July of 2007 and vanished. Her car was found, but she was nowhere to be found for years. The family never gave up hope that she was still alive out there, but a witness finally came forward with a story of a drum. He knew where the concrete was poured and where it was dropped. The truth was at the bottom of the bay. A car bomb is a loud way to make a person vanish into the light. But some secrets are buried in a much more quiet and heavy way today. We move away from the loud fires of the Beirut seafront and the glass. We travel over the ocean to the hot and humid air of Manila. Here, a woman disappeared without a single loud sound in the middle of a day. She was not taken by a bomb, but by a solid block of stone. The secrets of this case were hidden at the bottom of the ocean. The divers felt a heavy weight on the end of the thick nylon line. The water in the bay was dark and very difficult to see through today. They were 50 feet below the surface, in the thick and salty Manila mud. They found a rusted steel drum that was covered in sharp white barnacles. It was far too heavy for a single man to lift to the surface. They had to use a powerful hydraulic winch to pull it from the silt. The metal groaned as it slowly rose toward the bright morning sun above. The barrel finally broke the surface of the water with a loud and wet splash. It was encased in a thick layer of gray and very solid concrete. The police officers on the boat watched in silence as the drum was landed. It smelled like the deep ocean and old rust and something much more dark. They knew that a human being was likely trapped inside that heavy stone block. A family had been waiting for 2 long years for this single moment today. The mystery of the missing mother was about to reach a grim end. How does a woman vanish and end up in a block of heavy stone? Ruby Rose Barrameda was a devoted mother who loved her 2 young daughters dearly. She was caught in a bitter legal war that felt like a nightmare. She went to a simple meeting, and then she was never seen again. Her search lasted for over 700 days of silence and deep pain. The truth was hidden in a rusted steel drum at the bottom of bay. It was a case of cold-blooded murder and a very long cover. Let us go back to July 10 of the year 2007. It was a Tuesday in the busy and crowded city of Manila. The sun was hot and the humidity was high across the entire island. Ruby Rose was preparing for another day of her difficult and long court battle. She was fighting for the custody of her 2 young and beautiful children. Her relationship with her husband and his family had become very toxic and dark. She felt a constant sense of pressure and fear in her daily life. Ruby Rose was a woman of strong character and a very kind and warm heart. She spent every waking moment thinking about the future of her 2 girls. Her sister Rochelle was her closest friend and her greatest support during this time. They spoke on the phone several times every single day to share their news. Ruby was determined to provide a safe and happy home for her young family. She believed that the law would eventually protect her and the children from harm. She had no idea that a trap was being set. On that Tuesday morning, Ruby Rose got into her car to run a few errands. She told her family that she was going to meet with her lawyer. She drove toward a popular shopping mall in the center of the busy city. The traffic was heavy, and the streets were filled with the sound of horns. She parked her car in the mall lot and walked toward the entrance. This was the last time she was seen alive by any member of public. She vanished into the crowd without a single witness seeing the struggle today. By the evening, her family began to worry because she had not returned home. Ruby always called to check on her girls before the sun went down. Her phone went straight to voicemail every time Rochelle tried to call her. The family drove to the mall and found her car in the parking. It was locked and her purse was sitting on the front passenger seat. There were no signs of any violence or a struggle inside the vehicle. It was as if she had simply walked away and never returned. The police opened a missing persons case the very next morning in the city. They interviewed the mall security and looked at the grainy and old video feeds. They saw Ruby Rose walking toward the mall, but she never entered the doors. A dark van had pulled up beside her in a blind spot today. The investigators suspected that she had been abducted by a group of professional men. They began to look closely at her husband and his wealthy and powerful family. The legal battle over the children provided a very clear motive. The Barrameda and Jimenez families were very influential in the local fishing industry. They owned warehouses and large boats that operated across the entire Manila Bay. They had the money and the power to hide a very dark secret. The police faced many obstacles as they tried to search their private properties. Every lead seemed to go cold as the months turned into long years. Ruby's sister Rochelle never stopped fighting for the truth about her missing sibling. She held rallies and spoke to the media every single week today. The search for Ruby Rose became a national story across the entire Philippines. People were haunted by the image of the young mother who just vanished. The family offered a large reward for any information about her current location. They received hundreds of tips, but none of them led to a discovery. The silence of the ocean seemed to swallow the entire investigation for 2 years. Rochelle believed that someone in the inner circle would eventually break their silence. She was right about the power of guilt and the pressure of law. In June of 2009, a man named Manuel Montero stepped forward. He was a former employee of the powerful Jimenez family fishing business today. He told the police that he could no longer live with the guilt. He confessed that he was part of the team that killed Ruby Rose. He described a warehouse where the concrete was mixed in a large drum. He gave the detectives the exact coordinates in the bay where it fell. The police finally had the map to the grave in the sea. Manuel described the events of July 10 in a very cold and detached voice. He said that Ruby was snatched from the mall parking lot very quickly. She was taken to a remote warehouse owned by her own in-laws. There she was murdered by a group of men acting on direct orders. They placed her body into a steel drum and filled it with cement. They waited for the concrete to dry and harden into a solid block. Then they took the drum out into the deep water at night. The killers believed that the concrete would keep her hidden for 1,000 years. They thought the weight of the drum would bury her in the mud. They chose a spot in the bay where the currents were very strong. They dumped the heavy barrel into the dark water and watched it sink. They went back to their lives as if nothing had ever happened today. They believed that their wealth and their power made them completely and totally untouchable. But the witness had watched them from the shadows of the old pier. The recovery of the drum was a massive and very delicate operation for police. The divers had to work in nearly zero visibility on the ocean floor. They used sonar to locate the shape of the barrel in the silt. When the drum was finally opened, the forensic team found the remains inside. Ruby Rose was identified by her clothing and her dental records that afternoon. The concrete had preserved her body in a way that told a story. She was finally back with her family after 2 years in dark. The autopsy showed that she had died from a sudden and violent act. The evidence inside the drum linked the concrete to the Jimenez warehouse today. The police found the same brand of cement and the same steel barrels. They also found traces of her DNA on the floor of the building. The witness testimony of Manuel Montero provided the link to the family leaders. He named her father-in-law and her uncle as the masterminds. They had wanted to end the custody battle in a final way. Now let us pause for a moment and really think about this. I want you to consider the sheer cruelty of this specific crime. This was a mother who was killed because she loved her own children. The people who were supposed to be her family turned into her killers. I do not know about you, but that is a heavy thought. Imagine the terror of being trapped in that warehouse in the dark. We believe that family is a place of safety and of trust, but here it was the source of the ultimate betrayal today. Now I want you to really think about the what if of this. What if Ruby Rose had never gone to that mall meeting alone? What if she had listened to the small voice of fear in her? We often ignore our instincts because we want to believe the best of people. I do not know about you, but that fact is truly haunting. We walk through our lives thinking we are safe in the bright light, but sometimes the people closest to us are the ones in the shadows. It is a terrifying reality that changes how you see the world. The legal battle that followed the discovery was long and very complex today. The father-in-law and the uncle were arrested and charged with murder. They hired the best lawyers in the country to fight the criminal case. The trial dragged on for many years as they filed many different appeals. Manuel Montero eventually recanted his testimony and went into hiding in the city. This was a massive blow to the prosecution and the Barrameda family today. The search for justice in Manila is often a very slow walk. The Jimenez family maintained their innocence throughout the entire long and loud trial. They claimed that Manuel was lying to get a lighter sentence for himself. They used their vast wealth to challenge every single piece of forensic evidence. The courtrooms were filled with tension and the tears of the grieving sister. Rochelle stood strong and faced the men she believed killed her beloved sister. She wanted the world to remember the face of Ruby Rose today. She would not let the power of money silence the voice of truth. The case became a symbol of the struggle against the powerful in Philippines. It highlighted the dangers that women face in domestic and legal disputes today. People across the nation followed the updates with a deep and dark focus. They wanted to see the people in the steel drum mystery pay. The tragedy of the Barrameda family was felt by every mother in Manila. It was a reminder that the law must apply to everyone equally. The rusted drum was a physical piece of evidence that could not lie. Ruby Rose Barrameda was finally laid to rest in a beautiful green cemetery. Her daughters grew up knowing the story of their brave and loving mother. They learned that she fought for them until her very final breath. The family continues to seek a final and absolute legal resolution today. They want the people who ordered the killing to spend life in prison. The memory of the woman in the concrete block will never fade away. She is a reminder of the power of a sister's love. The warehouse where the crime occurred was eventually closed and left to rot. The steel drums were removed and the concrete floor was scrubbed clean today. But the air in the building still feels heavy and very cold. The local people say that the area is haunted by a shadow. They avoid the pier where the boat was launched into the bay. The mystery of the Black Dahlia of Manila has a permanent place. It is a story of a mother and a block of stone. The water of Manila Bay is still dark and very murky in the night. The waves hit the shore with a slow and steady rhythmic beat. The secrets of the ocean are vast and they are very deep. We move away from the rusted drum and the solid gray concrete. The camera travels back across the world to a market in Ghana. We are looking for a different kind of ritual and a killing. A merchant has been murdered for the sake of an internet scam. The voodoo of the modern world is waiting. The Quejedia market is a place of loud voices and bright colors today. Thousands of people move through the stalls to buy and sell their goods. A wealthy merchant is closing his shop for the final time this week. He has a pocket full of cash and a smile for his friends. He does not know that a group of young men is watching him. They do not want his money for their own pockets right now. They want his spirit to help them win a digital game. The darkness of Kumasi is rising. The dark waters of Manila Bay are thousands of miles behind us now. We travel west across the vast ocean to the warm heart of Ghana. The humid air of the Philippines turns into the dry heat of Kumasi. In Manila, a mother was stolen for a dark and family secret. In West Africa, a man was stolen for a digital and hollow ghost. The Quejedia market is one of the largest and busiest places today. Thousands of people move between the stalls in a loud dance of trade. The rain has stopped here, but the air is thick with smoke. We are moving toward a very modern kind of ancient evil. A wealthy merchant was found lying on the floor of his quiet bedroom. His body was missing its heart and its tongue and several other parts. Ritual items were scattered around the room in a very specific pattern. There was no signs of a forced entry through the heavy doors. The police arrived to find a scene that defied all modern logic. It was clear that a life had been taken for a purpose, but the motive was not robbery or a simple act of revenge. It was a trade made for the success of an internet scam. The city was gripped by a new and terrifying fear. Can ancient ritual beliefs be combined with the modern world of computers? This was the question that the detectives in Kumasi had to answer. They were looking for a group of young men with a secret. These were people who spent their nights in dark and quiet cafes. They were trying to trick people out of their money using emails, but they felt they needed a spiritual edge to make it work. They turned to a shaman who promised them a very dark power. A single merchant became the fuel for their digital and greedy dreams. This was a war of souls. Let us go back to April 5 of the year 2007. The sun was setting over the city of Kumasi in West Africa. The Kajetia market was finally starting to close for the long day. It is a place where you can buy anything from silk to steel. The merchant was a successful man who was respected by his peers. He had built his fortune over many decades of hard and honest work. He felt safe in his community and his very beautiful large home. He had no idea that he was being watched from afar. The predators were waiting for him. The merchant walked through the crowded stalls with a smile on his face. He greeted his friends and checked on the daily price of gold. He carried a small bag of cash from the sales of the day. To him, the market was a second home and a place of peace. He did not see the group of young men following his steps. They were known in the neighborhood as the Sakawa boys of the area. These were teenagers who spent all their time on the World Wide Web. They were obsessed with wealth and fast cars and expensive new clothes. They wanted it all today. The Sakawa boys were struggling to make their internet scams work for them. They sent out thousands of emails to people in the United States. They promised grand fortunes and secret inheritances to anyone who would listen. But very few people were falling for their simple and old tricks. They felt that their luck had run out in the digital world. One of the boys suggested they seek help from a local shaman. He claimed that a ritual could make their messages much more powerful. They decided to combine the old magic with the new code. The shaman lived in a small and dark house on the edge of Kumasi. He was a man who claimed to speak with the ancient spirits. He told the boys that a sacrifice was needed for their success. He wanted the spirit of a successful man to bless their computers. He suggested that a wealthy merchant would be the perfect and ideal soul. The boys were filled with a dark and desperate kind of greed. They agreed to perform the killing in exchange for the secret power. They began to track the merchant through the busy market streets. They spent several days watching the routine of the wealthy businessman closely. They learned when he went home and who was inside his house. They realized he lived alone with only one guard at the gate. The plan was to strike in the middle of a Tuesday night. They gathered their tools and prepared their hearts for the ritual act. The air in Kumasi was still and very heavy with dark intent. They moved through the shadows of the trees toward the merchant's home. They were ready to trade a human life for a laptop screen. The boys managed to bypass the guard at the front gate silently. They entered the house through a window that had been left open. The merchant was fast asleep in his large and comfortable bed then. They did not hesitate as they moved toward the sleeping and calm man. They used a heavy cloth to silence his screams in the dark room. The ritual was performed exactly as the shaman had instructed them to do. They took the parts of the body that were needed for spell. They left the house as quickly as they had arrived. The news of the murder spread through the Kajetia market like a fire. People were horrified by the details of the ritualistic and cold killing. The merchant was a man who had never hurt a single person. The idea that he was targeted for magic was a heavy blow. The police launched a massive and very aggressive investigation into the crime. They knew they were looking for people involved in the Sakawa culture. They began to raid the internet cafes across the entire large city. They were looking for any sign of the ritual items. Detectives found a young man who was acting very strangely in a cafe. He was wearing expensive new shoes, but he had no legal job. He was staring at his computer screen with a look of terror. When they questioned him, he began to shake and cry out loud. He led the police to the small house of the local shaman. There the officers found the missing parts of the merchant's body today. They also found a computer mouse that was covered in dark blood. This was the locking clue that tied the two worlds together. The shaman confessed to the entire plot during the long police interview. He told them that the boys believed the spirit would help them. They thought the merchant's success would transfer into their digital bank accounts. It was a bizarre and very tragic blend of old and new. The boys had even rubbed the blood on their laptop keyboards daily. They thought it would make their scam emails impossible to ignore anymore. The detectives were chilled by the lack of remorse in their voices. They only cared about the money they hoped to win. Now let us pause for a moment to really think about this. I want you to consider the sheer madness of this specific crime. We think of the internet as a place of modern and cold logic. We do not think of it as a place for ritual sacrifice. I do not know about you, but that is a very heavy thought. Imagine the person on the other end of a scam email today. They have no idea that a life was traded for a message. It is a level of darkness that defies all common sense. You and I see a world of screens and of high-speed data. But these young men saw a world of spirits and dark magic. They were willing to kill a good man for a digital blessing. It shows how the human mind can twist the new into the old. The greed of the Sakawa boys was more powerful than any moral code. They were the victims of their own dark and very twisted delusions. It makes you look at every spam email in your inbox differently. You never know the price that was paid for a lie. The legal outcome of the case was very swift and very absolute. The shaman and the young men were brought to a public trial. The evidence of the ritual items in the computer was completely clear. They were all found guilty of the murder of the wealthy merchant. The judge sentenced them to death by a firing squad in Kumasi. He wanted to send a message that ritual killing would not stay. The city watched as they were led away to their final fate. The merchant's family finally had a small sense of justice. The aftermath of the case led to a crackdown on internet fraud. The government of Ghana began to monitor the Sakawa culture closely. They wanted to separate the traditional religion from the violent crimes. The Kejetia market returned to its busy and loud routine eventually. But the merchant's stall remained empty for a very long time today. People would walk past and say a quiet prayer for his soul. They remembered him as a man of peace in a world of greed. The digital ghosts were finally laid to rest in Kumasi. The computer mouse from the crime scene sits in a police locker. It is a piece of evidence that shows the reach of the dark. The plastic is stained, and it tells a very tragic story today. The rain falls on the streets of Kumasi in the quiet night. The market is closed, and the stalls are all very silent now. The memory of the merchant is a part of the city's history. We move away from the ritual and the screens of Ghana. The camera pulls away from the African coast tonight. I want to thank you for spending this long and dark night with me. These stories are a reminder of how strange and fragile our world can be. We have traveled from the opera of Vienna to the bays of Manila. We have seen the darkness that can hide behind a simple smile. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so yet. I truly appreciate your time and your support for these very real cases. It is a privilege to share these stories with you every week. You are the reason I do this work. Now, I want you to take a deep breath and get very comfortable. You have been through a lot of tension during these stories tonight. It is time to let the weight of the world just fall away. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain take over. You are safe in your own home, and the doors are locked. The world outside is quiet, and the night is very peaceful now. There are no more monsters and no more shadows to fear tonight. You can finally let go and find a rest. The rain is falling softly on the glass of your bedroom window now. It is a steady and rhythmic sound that fills the quiet room. You are safe and you are warm under the weight of blankets. Your breathing is slowing down as you listen to the soft rain. There is no more tension and no more stories to hear tonight. The world outside is dark and the shadows are very peaceful. You are drifting away into a deep and very restful sleep. Everything is okay, and the rain will continue to fall for you. The sound of the water is like a soft and gentle lullaby. It washes away the stress and the fear of the dark day. You are floating on a sea of calm and very quiet energy. The stories of the night are fading into the distant past now. Your mind is quiet and your body is feeling very heavy. The warmth of the room is like a soft and kind hug. You are sinking deeper into the soft pillows of your bed. The rain is your constant and very faithful friend tonight. Sleep is coming to you. The night is long, but you are protected by the quiet walls. You can hear the leaves rustling in the soft breeze outside. The world is at rest, and you are part of that peace. There is nothing left to do and nothing left to think. You are simply here in the moment with the soft rain. The darkness is a soft blanket that covers the entire world. You are slipping into a dream that is bright and kind. The stories have ended, and the silence is your reward. You are sleeping very soundly now. The rain continues to fall with a steady and slow beat. It is a song that has no words but a deep meaning. It tells you that the world is still turning and safe. You are a part of the quiet and the dark night. Your heart is beating with a slow and very calm rhythm. The weight of your eyes is too much to carry anymore. You are letting go of the final and tiny spark of light. The dream is waiting for you with open and warm arms. The rain is falling. You are safe and you are warm and you are loved. The morning will come, but it is far away from here. For now there is only the rain and the soft dark. You have found the peace that you were looking for today. The stories of the night have been put away in a box. You are a passenger on a boat in a calm sea. The waves are small and they rock you to sleep. The rain is the only sound in the whole world. You are drifting and you are dreaming now. The silence is a gift that you have earned tonight. You have walked through the shadows and found the light. The world is a place of mystery, but you are home. The rain is a silver curtain that hides the whole world. You are alone in your peace, and it is very good. Your breathing is a soft sigh in the quiet and dark. The night is your friend, and the sleep is deep. You are falling into the heart of the rest. The rain is falling softly on the glass. The digital ghosts of Ghana have been laid to rest in the red dirt. We move from the magic of the market to a cold reality. We travel north to the snowy and gray streets of Moscow. In Ghana, the killing was done for a hollow and dark dream. In Russia, the killing is done to stop the truth from speaking. The rain turns to a biting and frozen sleet on the glass. We are moving toward a place where the shadows are the state. This is a story of a woman who was a light. She was marked for death by the men in power. Natalia Estemirova stood on the doorstep of her small apartment in the city. She looked down and saw a black envelope with no return address. She did not need to open it to know what was inside. She had been receiving these silent and dark warnings for months now. She felt the cold wind of the Moscow winter through her thin coat. She looked down the empty street and saw a black car idling. The windows were tinted, and the engine made a low growl today. She knew that her time was running out in the quiet snow. What happens when the state itself decides you are a criminal for truth? Natalia was a human rights activist who worked in the war zones. She spent her days documenting the stories of mothers and lost sons. She was the one who counted the bodies that the government ignored. This made her the most dangerous woman in the entire Russian Federation. Someone had issued a secret and absolute death warrant for her soul. They did not want her money or her land or her house. They wanted her silence at any and every cost today. Let us go back to the early months of the year 2007. The city of Moscow was a place of high walls and deep secrets. The political atmosphere was turning into a cold and very sharp blade. Natalia worked for a group that documented the crimes of the local state. She spent much of her time in the region of Chechnya today. This was a land of broken buildings and missing and forgotten people. She was the only person who was willing to speak their names. She was a witness to the things that no one saw. Natalia was a woman of immense and very quiet and steady inner strength. She believed that every human life was a sacred and important thing. She carried a small notebook and a camera everywhere she went today. She interviewed the victims of the state-sponsored and secret kidnapping units. She wrote down the dates and the locations and the names of the men. She was building a massive and undeniable file of human rights crimes. She believed that the truth would eventually set her people free. She was a threat to the power of the local leaders. The local officials in the region began to take notice of her work. They did not like a woman asking questions about the missing and dead. They began to follow her through the streets of the small villages. They tapped her phone lines and they watched her small home at night. Natalia felt the pressure of their eyes on her back every single day. She knew that her colleagues were being arrested and taken away slowly. The circle of safety was closing in on her very fast that year. She was a woman alone in a dark storm. On a cold morning in February, Natalia received a very strange phone call. A man with a low and gravelly voice told her to stop writing. He said that her name was now on a very special list of people. He told her that accidents happen to those who do not listen well. Natalia hung up the phone and sat in the silence of her room. She knew that this was not a prank or a simple and idle threat. It was a promise from the men who held the power of life. She chose to keep writing her stories anyway. The pressure increased during the spring and the summer months of that year. Natalia found that her neighbors were being questioned about her daily habits. Men in dark suits would stand outside her office for many long hours. They did not say anything, but they made sure she saw them there. It was a psychological war designed to break her strong and steady spirit. They wanted her to leave the country and never return to the region. But Natalia was the daughter of the soil, and she would not run. She stayed to face the rising and dark tide. A critical turning point came when a leaked document reached her small desk. It was a stack of death warrants for activists and human rights leaders. Natalia saw her own name at the very top of the list that year. The document was signed by officials who worked for the regional government. It gave the secret police the authority to use any means necessary. This was the moment she realized she was living in a slow assassination. The government was no longer a protector, but a cold and steady predator. She was a target of the state. The document described the activists as enemies of the peace and the order. It accused them of working for foreign powers to destroy the nation. This was a common and very effective lie used to justify the violence. Natalia knew that the warrants were not about the law or the justice. They were about the fear of the truth being told to the world. She decided to send a copy of the list to her friends in Europe. She wanted to make sure the evidence survived her own death. She was preparing for the final act of her life. Natalia continued to travel to the remote villages of Chechnya during the autumn. She met with a mother whose son had been taken from his bed at night. The woman was crying and begging for any news of his current location. Natalia took her hand and promised to find out the truth for her. She knew that the men who took the boy were likely the ones watching her. She was walking into the heart of the fire with her eyes open. She felt a deep sense of duty that outweighed her own fear. She was a woman on a mission. The secret police were using a fleet of black cars to track her today. They moved through the city of Grozny like a pack of silent wolves. They knew her schedule and her favorite cafes and her friends' homes. They were waiting for the right moment to execute the final order. The atmosphere in the region was one of total and absolute terror. No one dared to speak to Natalia in public for fear of being taken. She was a ghost walking among the living in the snowy streets. The end was coming for the angel of the poor. The reenactment of the threats showed a systematic and very cold campaign. The state was not in a hurry to kill her on the first day of work. They wanted to isolate her and make her feel completely and totally alone. They wanted to show her that no one could protect her from the state. They took away her friends and her resources and her quiet sense of peace. They turned her life into a series of dark and very scary shadows. It was a display of absolute power over a single and brave soul. They were winning the slow and dark game. Now let us pause for a moment to really think about this. I want you to consider the courage it takes to stand in that light. Natalia knew that every word she wrote was a step toward her grave. She could have left the country and lived a long and safe life, but she chose to stay and fight for people who had no one else. I do not know about you, but that fact is truly haunting to me. We often take our freedom of speech for granted in the West. But for Natalia, it was a death sentence from the state. Imagine the weight of seeing your own name on a list for liquidation. You are eating your breakfast and you know that men are coming for you. You do not know the day or the hour, but you know the end is near. This level of psychological pressure is enough to break almost any person. but Natalia used it as fuel to work even harder for the poor. She was a person of immense and very rare moral character and focus. She was the very thing the state feared the most in the world. She was the truth. The legal outcome of the case was a tragedy of the highest and darkest order. Natalia Estemirova was eventually abducted and murdered in the year 2009. The threats of 2007 were the precursor to her final execution. The men who took her were never brought to a trial for the crime. The regional government denied any involvement in the killing of the activist. The investigation was stalled by a lack of cooperation from the local police. It was a cold and total victory for the men in the black cars today. The aftermath of the killing led to a global outcry from the world. International leaders demanded a full and fair investigation into the murder. They spoke about the death warrants and the systematic cleansing of the region. But the walls of the Kremlin remained silent and very high and cold. The activists who remained were forced to work in even greater secret. The voice of Natalia was silenced, but her work lived on in others. She became a martyr for the cause of human rights in the East. She was a light in the dark. Today there are flowers on the spot where she was taken from her home. People come in the middle of the night to leave a single red candle. They remember the woman who was the angel of the poor in Chechnya. They remember her notebook and her camera and her soft and kind voice. The state tried to erase her name from the history of the nation, but the truth has a way of coming back to the bright light. Natalia Estemirova is a name that the men in power still fear today. She is a reminder of their own dark crimes. The notebook that she carried is now in a safe place in Europe. It contains the names of the missing and the stories of the dead. It is a physical piece of evidence that the state cannot burn away. The sleet continues to fall on the gray streets of Moscow tonight. The city is quiet, and the black cars are still idling on corners. The shadows of the state are long, and they are very deep. We move away from the snow and the death warrants of Russia. The camera travels back to a small house in the west. The cyberbully suicide is our final and very tragic stop tonight. We move from the political crimes of a state to a screen. It is a story of a bedroom and a girl and a fake boy. A woman has created a monster to hurt a child across the street. She does not use a bomb or a gun or a heavy sword. She uses a single message to destroy a young and fragile life. The glow of the computer is the only light in the dark. We are standing in a quiet suburb of Missouri today. The silence is heavy. We often think of hit squads as men in black cars with tinted windows. We believe that state terror is something far away and professional, but some of the most dangerous predators do not need a gun. They do not need a bomb or a heavy samurai sword. They sit in a quiet kitchen with a cup of coffee. They use a keyboard to deliver a message into a child's heart. We are traveling back to the United States right now. We are standing in a quiet suburb in Missouri tonight. The silence is heavy and very cold. 13-year-old Megan Meyer sat in her bedroom in the fading evening light. The only glow in the dark room came from her computer screen. She was staring at a message that had just appeared on her profile. It was from a boy she thought was her best friend. The words on the screen were cold and very sharp and cruel. They told her that the entire world would be better without her. Megan felt a sudden and hollow ache in her young chest. She could not breathe as she read the final line. Her heart was breaking. How can words from a person who does not exist kill a child? Megan thought she was talking to a handsome boy named Josh Evans. She believed that he truly cared for her and her feelings. But Josh was a ghost created by a person she knew well. He was a weapon designed to hurt her in a digital space. The weight of his words was enough to push her over the edge. This case would challenge the legal system of the entire nation. It revealed a new and very dark kind of human cruelty. Let us go back to November of the year 2007. A grand jury was looking at a case from the previous year. The details of the investigation were starting to leak to the public. People were shocked to learn the truth about the death of Megan. It was a story of a neighborhood friendship that turned into war. The quiet streets of the suburb were hiding a very deep secret. Everyone wanted to know who was responsible for the final message. The search for justice was moving into the online world. Megan was a girl who struggled with her weight and her confidence. She had been through years of bullying at her middle school. Her parents did her best to support her and her dreams. She spent much of her time online looking for a connection. She wanted to find a place where she felt safe and accepted. MySpace was the most popular social network for teenagers during that time. She created a profile and hoped to make some new friends. She just wanted to feel like she belonged somewhere. She was thrilled when a boy named Josh Evans sent a request. His photo showed a 16-year-old boy who was very handsome. He told Megan that he had recently moved to a nearby town. They began to send messages back and forth every single night. Josh was kind, and he listened to her talk about her day. He told her that she was beautiful and very special to him. Megan felt a sense of joy that she had never felt. She believed she had finally found a true and loyal friend. The online romance continued for several weeks during that long autumn. Megan would rush home from school to check her private messages. She told her mother that she was finally happy and glowing. Josh seemed to understand her in a way that no one else did. They shared their secrets and their hopes for the bright future. It was a perfect and safe world built on a computer screen. But the digital walls were about to come crashing down on her. The light in her room was starting to fade. Suddenly, the tone of the messages from Josh began to change. He told Megan that he had heard she was a mean person. He claimed that she was talking behind the backs of her friends. Megan tried to defend herself and explain that it was not true. But Josh would not listen to her pleas or her many tears. He began to post cruel things about her on her public wall. Other students from her school saw the posts and joined in. The bullying had followed her into her own private bedroom. The escalation of the digital attacks was very fast and very violent. Megan sat at her desk and watched the insults pile up. She felt as if the entire world was laughing at her. Her parents tried to get her to walk away from computer. They told her that the words of strangers did not matter. But to a 13-year-old girl, the internet was the world. She could not look away from the screen or the pain. The final message from Josh arrived just before dinner time. The words told her that she was a bad person and worthless. It said that the world would be better off without her. Megan let out a sob and ran toward her bedroom closet. Her mother found her a few minutes later in a state. They rushed her to the hospital, but it was too late. The light of Megan Meyer had been extinguished by a message. The police arrived at the house to find the computer on. The screen was still glowing with the final and cruel words. The investigation began. Detectives began to look into the identity of the boy named Josh. They contacted MySpace and asked for the records of the account. They wanted to find the person who had sent the final blow. They expected to find a teenage boy with a mean streak. But the IP address led to a house on her street. It was the home of a family that lived directly across. The person behind the screen was not a boy at all. It was a mother named Lori Drew who lived there. The discovery sent a shockwave through the entire quiet neighborhood today. Lori Drew was the mother of a girl who knew Megan. The two girls had been friends until a small fight happened. Lori claimed she created Josh to see what Megan said. She wanted to know if Megan was being mean to her daughter. She had used a fake photo and a fake name to lie. She had watched a 13-year-old girl fall in love. Then she had used that love to destroy her heart. The Myers and the Drews had once been very close friends. They spent their summers together and had many backyard barbecues then. But a falling out between the daughters had changed everything fast. Lori Drew decided to take the side of her own child. She did not use a mature way to handle the conflict. She chose to use a digital mask to haunt a child. She sat in her kitchen and typed the words of Josh. She was a grown woman playing a very dark game. Now let us pause for a moment and really think. I want you to consider the nature of our digital world. We are often more cruel when we cannot see a face. We hide behind a screen and say things we would not. I do not know about you, but that fact is terrifying. We have built a world where words can kill a child. Lori Drew did not have to touch Megan to hurt her. She used the human need for connection as a trap. It is a reality that we all share. The legal struggle in 2007 was a difficult walk. There were no laws for cyberbullying in the state then. The police could not charge Lori Drew with murder or assault. They had to look for a different way to seek justice. They eventually used a federal law about computer and data fraud. They argued that Lori had violated the terms of the site. It was a reach for a system that was not ready. The nation watched as the case went to a jury. The jury eventually found Lori Drew guilty of 3 minor counts, but a judge later overturned the convictions in a final ruling. He said the law was not meant to cover social media. Lori Drew walked out of the courtroom as a free woman. The Meyer family was left with a hole in their lives. They had lost their daughter and they had lost the case. But they did not stop fighting for a change in law. They wanted to make sure Megan was the very last. The story of Megan Meyer led to a massive shift in law. Many states began to write new rules for the digital age. Federal anti-bullying laws were proposed in her very name. Schools began to teach children about the power of their words. The case became a landmark for the fight against online harassment. Megan was gone, but her name became a shield for others. Her parents turned their grief into a powerful and loud voice. They made sure the world knew the face of Megan. Today, the memory of Megan is a part of our history. Her story is told in classrooms across the entire country now. It is a warning about the darkness of the digital world. We must be careful of the things we say online. We must remember that there is a person behind the screen. A single message can change a life forever in an instant. Megan Meyer was a girl who just wanted to be loved. We must honor her by being kind to each other. I want you to think about that final glowing computer screen. It is a cold and steady image that stays with me. A life was traded for a few lines of text. The silence of that bedroom in Missouri is very deep. The rain falls on the streets of the quiet suburb. The houses are dark and the people are all fast asleep. But the memory of the 13-year-old girl remains. She is a light that will never fully go away. The camera pulls away from the house now. The night is long, but we have reached the very end. I want to thank you for staying with me tonight. These 14 stories have been a journey through the dark world. We have seen the best and the worst of humanity. I hope that you find a sense of peace now. Please remember to check your locks and stay very safe. I look forward to seeing you again for more stories. It is an honor to be your guide tonight. You are the reason that I tell these tales. Now, I want you to take a deep and slow breath. The tension of the stories is finally starting to fade. You are safe in your own warm and comfortable bed. The rain is falling softly on the glass of window. It is a rhythmic and steady sound that is very calm. You can close your eyes and let the light go. The world outside is quiet and the night is peaceful. There is no more work to do and no more. You are drifting into a very deep and restful sleep. The sound of the rain is a soft and gentle song. It washes away the shadows and the fear of night. You are wrapped in a blanket of calm and quiet. Your heart is beating with a slow and steady pulse. You are sinking into the soft pillows of your bed. The world is at rest and you are part of it. Everything is okay and the rain will continue to fall. You are safe and you are warm and calm. Sleep is coming to you very slowly and surely. The darkness is a soft and kind curtain for you. It covers the world and keeps the cold away tonight. You are a passenger on a boat in a sea. The waves are small and they rock you to sleep. Your mind is quiet and your body is feeling heavy. The stories have ended and the silence is your gift. You are slipping into a dream that is bright. The night is your friend and the rest is deep. You are sleeping very soundly in your home now. The rain is a silver curtain that hides the whole. You are alone in your peace and it is good. Your breathing is a soft sigh in the quiet dark. The morning will come, but it is far away tonight. For now, there is only the rain and the dark. You have found the peace that you were seeking. The stories have been put away in a safe box. You are floating on a sea of calm energy. The rain is the only sound in the world. You are dreaming. The night is long, but you are protected by walls. You can hear the leaves rustling in the soft breeze. The world is at rest, and you are part of it. There is nothing left to do but sleep now. You are simply here in the moment with the rain. The darkness is a soft blanket that covers the world. You are slipping into a dream that is kind. The stories have ended, and the silence is yours. You are sleeping very soundly in the warm room. The rain continues to fall with a steady, slow beat. It is a song that has no words but meaning. It tells you that the world is still turning safe. You are a part of the quiet and dark night. Your heart is beating with a slow and calm rhythm. The weight of your eyes is too much to carry. You are letting go of the final tiny spark light. The dream is waiting for you with open arms. The rain is falling softly on the glass window. Everything is quiet and the shadows are all at rest. You are drifting away into a world of bright peace. The rain is your constant and very faithful friend tonight. It will stay with you until the sun comes up. You are safe and you are warm and you sleep. The night is a gift and you have accepted it. You are sinking deeper into the soft and dark rest. The world is silent and the rain is falling. You are asleep now in the quiet night.